So we're going to get into some Rome and history after the TED Talk, which is about 48
Shit,
minutes.
who get the shit with me? Me? Shit.
So welcome. It wouldn't surprise me if they gave her the questions early. It was 3 against 1. They were ganging up on him.
Hang on.
And the fact checking was wrong.
I thought Donald Trump missed a couple of easy shots he could have taken. It's like,
oh, sure he could have. Yeah.
let me give you my thoughts on the thing because I've put that out there on Bear Fabrique.
Before you go any further, Teddy, can I just throw this one? I felt listening to Kamala Harris, she was operating as she is trained as a public prosecutor, and I felt the way she spoke and that a lot of the time was like a prosecutor speaking to a judge.
Okay, look, it's like one of the things that Donald Trump...
I didn't take it, that she was anything other than basically what she is, which is she's a prosecutor and she was prosecuting a case as she's seen it. But anyway, you go now.
Yeah, okay, look, it's like Donald Trump missed a cheap shot that he could have taken there at that point, which I really would have taken. He could have said something about Tulsi Gabbard and what Tulsi Gabbard did to the kookaburra. I call this woman the kookaburra.
Yeah.
Right? Because you know what kookaburras sound like. That to me is what Kamala Harris sounds like. So I call her the kookaburra.
I mean,
the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, so the stumble bum and the kookaburra, right?
Yeah.
At any rate.
And they asked him, I thought that he got the one question wrong when they asked him about her being black all of a sudden. He kind of dodged the question, and I think he should have stood up and said, yeah, because she's pandering for votes. This woman
is nowhere close to being black. I mean, I'm as black as she is. That's ridiculous.
She's Indian.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I don't even think she looks like an Indian. She looks like just ordinary Heinz 57 American.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
She doesn't look like anything particularly. All just hype.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, to see by looking at Trump the beating he's been taking. I mean, the guy goes to every interview. He's like the Energizer Bunny. I've never seen. He's been running for president since the day he lost. For 4 years.
Sorry?
I felt Trump could have had a really good go at her on Afghanistan.
Yes.
Trump could have turned around and said to her with Afghanistan, you stand here talking about I'm going to stop abortions. You stand here talking about women's rights and all that. Yet the pullout that you and Biden did on Afghanistan, have a look at what it's like in Afghanistan for the women there now. They're not allowed out without they're fully covered. They have to have a male with them. They're not allowed to speak in public. All those things. And that is because you just went in and pulled out. You know, as he pointed out, you gave that airfield away under the agreement. They could have won there on the abortion issue. Instead of going to, like as far as he did, I would have turned it to her and said, at what point does a fetus become a human? And that is really the issue of that. And of course, we don't want to see people's health put in jeopardy, but the point of the matter is we don't want to see abortion used as a contraception.
And they're manic pull out.
And he would have got a lot of support. right?
Yes.
Because
13 Marines.
the abortion debate is, at what point is a fetus now considered a living human,
Right.
right? And questions back to her like that. And I think that would make it very hard.
Well, I really thought the answer Trump gave was the right one. He said that, like, this is an issue which should be settled at the state level, the people's representatives. He said it makes no sense for, like, New Yorkers to be writing laws for Texas or Texans to be writing laws for California and New York. That's what he said. He said, Roe Wade was bad law. It violated separation of powers. It had to go, right? He said what they've done with it was correct. It's like they've sent it to the states, and they're letting the states make their, because you've got, like, large numbers of people in the United States and the red states that view abortion as a legalized form of murder, right? So, at some point, I mean, I don't see it that way. I mean, I wish I'd never heard the word. Because all I've ever seen the issue do in my lifetime is get good candidates for public offices defeated by
the fact checker told.
It's the only issue that halfway works for Democrats. That's it. They don't have any other issues. Let me.
The part where the fact checker, he talked about them letting babies die on the table, and that fact checker said there is nothing like that going on in the United States. Yes, there is.
There is.
There is. There are people who let the baby get born and sit there and watch it die.
That's right, and that debate's on out here at the moment too.
Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, I think my screen here.
Or even a miscarriage.
Share your screen?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. I gotta stop sharing for mine. I was gonna play a couple parts of the debate, but we can do that later. All right.
Right.
Sharing. Okay, go ahead.
Politicians call her cackles, right? I mean, Republicans call her cackles, but she wasn't being allowed to cackle last night, so she had to make do with leering. So you got all this leering,
Yeah.
Funky looking spot.
I wonder if she laughs when she's getting a bonking.
The one thing about the whole thing that gets me, and most people with uncommon sense will see it, but there was 3 against 1 at that debate. It wasn't just Trump, against her with fair moderators. They were clearly in the tank for Kamala.
Yeah.
Their fact checker was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because they said that, people aren't eating ducks in parks. They most certainly are.
Yeah.
And they're killing and raping people too. I mean, that's almost she knows how to say.
Right. Now, as far as like just style, if you were totally ignorant of the situation, if you didn't know what you were seeing, if you didn't know the history of these two people, you could have thought that Kamala Harris, you could have. It's a little bit of a stretch, but I could see somebody thinking that Kamala Harris might have won. She was certainly passionate enough, and if all you go by is passion,
Hitler was passionate too.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, it's like Donald Trump sounded like he was angry at times. He shouldn't. I would recommend that you not do that.
I know, but I got angry with him, watching it, watching them pummel him.
I mean, these people have screwed up the United States so fairly well. I mean, it's got every reason to be angry, But nonetheless, like if you just go on with that page, like I say, my take on the debate is there. Okay, get back to that page that talks about the debate.
All right, I think that's this way. Yeah.
Okay.
The debate. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Well, you go ahead. Read it.
I can't really read that from on my screen. It's like you're going to have to read it, Greg. It's like
many Republicans refer to Harris as cackles. She apparently wasn't being allowed to cackle during the debate. They told her about it, of course, and they had to settle for leering. People in focus groups complained that Kookaburra was ignoring questions from moderators was responding to questions by recited, memorized lines, generally following her own ideology. Did you know that her dad is a Marxist professor? And that of the ruling neocon cabal. That was good. Donald Trump could be forgiven for being less than an expert on cosmology, but the answers to a number of questions from both candidates left things to be desired. A few that I noticed a bit more than most. Moderators asked Kookaburra about abortion, and she replied with a long tirade. Roe v. violated separation of powers, was bad law and basically had to go. Trump correctly noted that the issue needed to be settled at the state level by the people's representatives, i.e., the New Yorkers should not be writing laws for Texas, nor Texans, and New York for New York. But somebody needed to talk about the way they handled the issue is handled by Democrats. When you see a Dem politician with his or her mouth open, there is an 80% chance she is talking about abortion. It's the only issue that appears to work for them after their Klan something stopped working for them in the late 1940s. But it's a phony issue. Yeah, the Klan, the Democrats were typically Southern racists. In the old days, that's what they were. The Republicans were actually created to stamp out slavery. That is, voting for somebody who is apt to start a third world war or a second worldwide depression because you're afraid of getting pregnant is irrational. The first time any of those people ever see a hydrogen bomb blow off or walk into their grocery store and see empty shelves, they will forget all about the abortion issue. Absolutely, right on. I don't feel like reading all night. Asked for support for Ukraine, Kookaburra went into a long diatribe about Ukraine being a holy cause, pleasing to God and King Stumblebum alike. Here is what an honest version of that might have sounded like. Kookaburra, many Americans are uncertain of the propriety of the U.S. government supporting the Nazi side of a conflict between Christians and Nazis, sending hundreds of billions of dollars to the Nazi regime in Kiev in what increasingly looks like a lost cause.
For Oprah Winfrey at the DNC, who is Kamala Harris?
She's a fraud.
In what respect?
She is an image that's been carefully crafted. You can start with what she is. She has a certain paint job, but that doesn't make her what she claims. And we have somebody that has a fabricated reality. I was just mentioning it a minute or two ago. She talks about she was that child on the bus integrating the schools. And if this was in California, I don't get it, because at that point I was a school teacher in LA, California, and we didn't have segregated schools. When she got in kindergarten, first, I was a playground director with the city school system. We didn't have segregated schools in the entirety of California. Both of my parents were school teachers. What they did is they shuffled the teachers around, but
right,
you went to school in your neighborhood. So I don't know where that study came in.
So
smoking dope in the dorm rooms, listening to Tupac. He was 11 years old when she was in the dorms, and when he cut his first single or release, he was 21, and she was a prosecutor in Alameda County, California. So
just real quick, what everyone said, it was, for example, if you cut school, they were actually pressing charges on parents. That was her idea to stop truancy.
Except in this case, the woman wasn't involved in that. The child was suffering from acute complications from sickle cell disease and was in the hospital. Kamala Harris sicked some press on the woman to wait outside her home while she was expecting assistance, and it turned out to be an arrest. And the girl was caused to have a stroke. You know, this kind of thing is bad, and that's not because the prosecutor is supposed to deliver justice, which includes every now and then standing up and saying, Your Honor, in the interest of justice, the state wishes to dismiss these charges. And she never did that because she always
on this, but just to summarize, the American people haven't gotten one interview with the vice president. We'll see one debate with the vice president. If she becomes president, says she hasn't forgotten her values, she hasn't changed. What are her values? What kind of president will she be?
She's a fascist. You can see strength through joy. 90 years ago, in Nazi Germany, they came up with a program, strength, and it was exactly the same as the one she's proposing. 90 years ago, same year, they came up with a bureau to suppress misinformation. Waltz and Harris have been pushing that. 90 years ago, 1934, Germany passed sweeping disarmament laws so the public would be. We're looking at a nascent fascist that I deplore. I've been in this business for a half-century. Of corrupt human beings, it is career prosecutors, not those who stay in for a long time and leave. There are exceptions, of course, but they tend to be completely ruthless, unconcerned with humanity. They want to win. They don't care. They'll do anything they can to do it, and somebody has to put them.
What would be your explanation for that? Kookaburra. Oh, yeah, that. You see, Ukraine is the planetary epicenter of money laundering, and the Ukrainian Nazis simply have too much something on too many U.S. politicians, too much shit, particularly Democrats, of course. There's the question about climate change. That isn't even a phony issue, more like total BS. You don't need to be an expert on cosmology to debunk that one. A couple of minor history lessons will suffice, i.e., the medieval climate optimum being followed by a little ice age that started in the 1400s. That was a major climate change, and there was no possibility of humans having anything to do with it. In real life, the only thing that has any influence on Earth's climate is our sun, and that might require just a little bit of cosmology to understand. Asked about Obamacare, Trump could have said something about putting RFK Jr. in charge of the FDA to get rid of the chronic diseases. Absolutely. The amount of money that would save might make Obamacare unnecessary. Very good. Yeah, that was good, Ted. Yeah.
Okay. That's my take on the debate, right? I mean, that's sort of short and sweet, really.
Yeah. Well, that was good enough. Yeah,
Right.
It was a sham. The whole fucking thing, I'm sorry, but it gets me angry. The whole damn thing was a sham, right from the start.
I don't think Trump lost any support or lost any votes on account of it.
No.
Okay. What I'm reading on the internet doesn't sound like that.
I don't either. Let's just go back.
And the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children.
Buying votes.
My passion, one of them, is small businesses. Yeah. My mother raised my sister and me, but there was a woman who helped raise us. We call her our second mother. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start up small businesses, knowing they
Where do I sign up for that?
My opponent, on the
Stop
other
right
hand,
there.
his plan is to do what he has done before.
Stop right there. Right. She's going to give a small business potentially $50,000 tax cut.
Yeah.
But they have to, now, if the tax rate's at 25%, they have to make $200,000 profit to get the $50,000. Because basically what she's saying is, and she doesn't say whether that's first year, second year, third year, how many years. Because most small business startups don't make profits in the first 2 or 3 years. I'm sure Teddy will agree with that.
They sure don't.
So in other words, she's given nothing.
Nothing.
Right?
Yeah.
Just blowing off a bit of hot air. Right?
Anything?
Continue on.
Okay. If you either one of you want to stop, just tell me.
Which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit. My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month.
Really? Because I never heard
Economists
him
have
say
said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
President Trump, I'll give you 2 minutes.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that. We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because it was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. They're taking in billions of dollars from China and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation has, which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. We were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago.
Yes,
this has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied.
I mean, just look at how she's looking at him. So, like, that's how my ex-wife looks at me when I'm making a point. You know, like, look at you out of your mind.
Right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon. And you see what's happening. You see what's happening with towns throughout the United States. You look at Springfield, Ohio. You look at Aurora in Colorado. They are taking over the towns. They're taking over buildings. They're going in violently. These are the people that she and Biden led into our country, and they're destroying our country. They're dangerous. They're at the highest level of criminality, and we have to get them out. We have to get them out fast. I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. I'll do it again and even better.
We are going to get to immigration and border security during this debate, but I would like to...
What did you think of that, Ted? That was a pretty good answer, huh?
Yeah, that wasn't bad.
Yeah, that started out good, I thought.
Vice
We'll just
President
watch a
Harris
little
respond
more.
on the economy here.
Well, I would love to. Let's talk about what Donald Trump left us. Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression.
Oh.
Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War.
By what?
And
By
what we
doing
have
what?
done is clean up Donald Trump's mess. What we have done and what I intend to do is build on what we know are the aspirations and the hopes of the American people. But I'm going to tell you all in this debate tonight, you're going to hear from the same old tired playbook.
Yeah,
A bunch of
yours.
lies, grievances,
Yours.
and name calling. What you're going to hear tonight is a detailed and dangerous plan called Project 2025 that the former
He
president
doesn't have
intends on
anything to
implementing
fucking
if
do
he
with
were elected again.
2025.
I believe very
God, she's a
strongly
liar.
that the American people want a president who understands the importance of bringing us together, knowing we have so much more in common than what separates us. And I pledge to you to be a president for all Americans. It's about taking everyone's guns away. Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff.
I support buybacks, and it's something I'm so passionate about and so looking forward to being president to address. We've got to deal with this.
How mandatory is your gun buyback program?
It's mandatory.
Stop with the continuous lying about this stuff.
President Trump, will give you a minute here to respond.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas, I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. I have nothing to do. Everybody knows I'm an open book. Everybody knows what I'm going to do. Cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy like I did before. We had the greatest economy. We got hit with a pandemic, and the pandemic was not since 1917, where 100 million people died. Has there been anything like it? We did a phenomenal job with the pandemic. We handed them over a country where the economy and where the stock market was higher than it was before the pandemic came in. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. We made ventilators for the entire world. We got gowns, we got masks, we did things that nobody thought possible. And people give me credit for rebuilding the military. They give me credit for a lot of things, but not enough credit for the great job we did with the pandemic. But the only jobs they got were bounce back jobs. These were jobs bounced back, and it bounced back and it went to their benefit. But I was the one that created them. They know it, and so does everybody else.
Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond.
That was a helly good answer.
Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his
she's going to
economic
go
plan,
ahead
it's all about
and
tax
do
breaks
all
for
the
the
things
richest
she said
people.
we were going to hear.
I am offering what I
Insults.
describe as an opportunity economy, and the best economists in our country, if not the world, have
Just give me one instance of your opportunity economy. Sounds like a phrase.
reviewed our relative plans for the future of America.
What?
I said they've had 4 years to do it.
4 years to do it. Why haven't they? Oh, it must be Biden's fault.
Economy.
What Goldman Sachs has said is that Donald Trump's plan would make the economy worse.
Oh, Goldman
Mine would
Sachs.
strengthen
Yeah,
the
they're in
economy.
touch with the middle
What
class.
the Wharton School has said is
Yeah.
Donald Trump's plan would actually explode
Oh, she
the
needs
deficit.
a drink of water.
16 Nobel laureates have described his economic plan as something that would increase inflation and by the middle of next year would invite a recession. You just have to look at where we are and where we stand on the issues. And I'd invite you to know that Donald Trump actually has no plan for you because he is more interested in defending himself than he is in looking out for you.
It's just a soundbite. They gave her that to say. Look, I went to the Wharton School of Finance, and many of those professors, the top professors, think my plan is a brilliant plan. It's a great plan. It's a plan that's going to bring up our worth, our value as a country. It's going to make people want to be able to go and work and create jobs and create a lot of good, solid money for our country. And just to finish off, she doesn't have a plan. She copied Biden's plan, and it's like 4 sentences, like run, spot, run. 4 sentences that are just, oh, we'll try and lower taxes. She doesn't have a plan. Take a look at her plan. She doesn't have a plan.
Mr. President, I do want to drill down on something you both brought up. The Vice President brought up your tariffs. You responded, and let's drill down on this because your plan is what she called.
Let's drill down on this. I can't stand people like that.
Is essentially a national sales tax. Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here, on foreign imports across the board. You recently said that you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this country.
That's damn right.
As you know, many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer.
No.
Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication.
Well, because we get a tariff? No.
Arguing it costs the typical family nearly $4,000 a year. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices. What's going to have and who's going to have higher prices is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years. I was the only president ever. China was paying us hundreds of billions of dollars, and so were other countries. And, you know, if she doesn't like them, they should have gone out and they should have immediately cut the tariffs. But those tariffs are there 3.5 years now under their administration. We are going to take in billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars.
I just wanted to say, yeah, they'll pass the price along to the consumer. That's the whole idea, because the tariff will make the cars so expensive that people won't want to buy them. They'd rather buy something built in America. So, you know, it may be bad for the other country, but it isn't bad for us at all.
Had no inflation, virtually no inflation. They had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country, because I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else. The people of our country are absolutely dying with what they've done. They've destroyed the economy. And all you have to do is look at a poll. The polls say 80 and 85 and even 90% that the Trump economy was great, that their economy was terrible.
Vice President Harris, I want to ask for your response. And you heard what
Greg,
Kicked butt there. Yeah.
Greg, it's like a couple things to note, right? It's like tariffs are a major part of what was called the American system of economics in the early 1800s.
Right.
Right. You know, this is the thing that took the United States in 1800 was a very backwards kind of a place where people were, you know, they were reading by lamps, you know, that used whale oil. They were heating their houses with you know, wood burning stoves, and within a space of 50 or 60 years, they built, you know, this American system of economics had turned. And this is the kind of thing that the LaRouche group harps on, right? They turned the United States into like a technological colossus, right? And the key ingredients to this thing were like, you know, a national bank, a system of incentives, you know, to develop, you know, major kinds of new industries, you know, forward-looking industries, and tariffs, right? And the tariffs were to prevent the English, particularly, from just dumping goods, you know, trying to remake the United States as a colony. Yeah. Okay. Now, well, like I said, probably the single biggest part of the whole thing was tariffs. That says cars made in the United States. You know, the people who are going to be able to afford cars, right, and be able to afford this and that and every other kind of thing will be made in the United States.
Right.
The money for all this stuff won't be flowing into Japan and China. Now, the other kind of thing I would tell people to take a look at is kinds of tariffs, the kinds of taxes that you're going to pay. That's tariff. Right. Yeah. On Japanese cars and motorcycles if you're living in Korea, right? And I mean to tell you that anybody in Korea that feels like he has to own a German or Japanese car is going to pay tariffs equal to, like, you know, 200% of the cost of the vehicle, right? It's like, you know, whatever that car would normally cost for a German or a Japanese citizen. What the Koreans have decided is that, like, hey, it's like we're not going to deindustrialize our nation for the sake of allowing people to own some kind of a car, some kind of a motorcycle that might be 2 years more advanced than what we know how to build at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I know that the tariffs would, like you said, was an excellent point. The tariffs will inspire companies to build their cars here so they don't have to pay them.
Now you've seen this of,
and bring back all the ones that left.
But you've seen this little Michael Moore's?
No.
Greg? No. You've seen this little video of Michael Moore's where Michael Moore talks about Donald Trump talking to the people in charge of Detroit, right? Yeah. And he said they had some kind of a meeting of manufacturers, which I think was more than just Ford. I think it was mainly Ford, right? But it was like other executives from the other car companies in Detroit had a meeting. You know, Donald Trump walked in front of them. He said, and Michael Moore said that nobody ever talked to these people this way. He said, hey, plants that produce cars and trucks here in Michigan and a couple of other northeastern states, right, and building new plants in Mexico, and then making these vehicles in Mexico and then bring them into the United States, so you're not going to get away with it. Right. He said, I'm going to stop a 30% tariff on all the, you know, said any kind of thing that you try to bring back across, if you go ahead and do that, then any kind of a car or truck you try to bring across the border into Texas, it's going to be immediately slapped with a 35, I think he said 35% tariff, right?
Yeah.
That shut that BS down in a big hurry.
It sure would. Yep.
So
Go ahead.
Ted.
Go ahead, Andy.
Ted, Greg, can you hear me?
Yeah.
What I'd like to say is this, Teddy. The problem with
I can hear you.
tariffs is this. We don't produce or manufacture any cars in this country anymore, yet we still pay tariffs. Right? Now, my problem with tariffs is if Trump says, I'm going to put a 35% tariff on these vehicles, and this money will be used for research and development for us to be producing vehicles at least equal, but preferably better than what can come into the country.
Yeah.
Right? I'd say I've got no problem paying a bit extra. But when it goes into the government's consolidated revenue and then just becomes part of the tax mix, when the time comes, they can't get rid of the tariffs because they can't afford to. And then it ultimately becomes a tax on the purchaser. So to use tariffs as a short-term thing while your industry adjusts, I think, yeah, that's fair and reasonable. But to leave them on, the reason why Kamala Harris and Smokey Joe never got rid of the tariffs that Trump put on is because they need that money.
They put on a mirror tariff. Whatever that country charges us is what we charge them.
But if that money was being used to do the research and the development for better of whatever you're putting the tariff on,
yeah, but we think
that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, go Ted.
Yeah, it's like with the Democratic administration, then yeah, that the money is just going to be used for their DEI. You know, it's going to be used for all their ideological projects, right? I mean, you know.
I was thinking more like countries like Japan and China, who sell a lot of goods to America. They should have to pay a tariff because it incites companies to stay inside the United States.
So the Japanese could be building factories in the United States, and I mean that would.
Well, they do. They've got assembly lines here. They do. It's funny now. Most American cars are made in foreign countries, and most foreign cars are made here.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, that's reasonable. That says that you've at least got American workers that are building these cars.
Right.
You know, I don't particularly care about the bean counters, the people in charge of the companies.
Right.
You know, it's a situation in the 1970s where.
For the people that say it doesn't matter who the president is very wrong. The president can sign something called a National Security Memorandum and sign it right into law, bypassing Congress. It's called an MSN or NSAM. So it does matter who's in office.
Basically, Detroit was out of control. It's like you had, like the Detroit automakers were being run by bean counters. Basically, they believed that they were never going to do anything better. They were never going to make any money on small cars, right? They believed that all they would the best they could hope for would be to break even selling a small car. So they deliberately they deliberately designed and built the two worst small cars ever been seen in the world. That's going to be like the Ford Pinto and the Chevrolet Vega, right? Which were just horrible. You know, I mean, the engine on that Vega was like about 40,000 miles, and that was it.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's carry on here. Just check out a little more.
What the president said there, because the Biden administration did keep a number of the Trump tariffs in place. So how do you respond?
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America. He invited trade wars. You want to talk about his deal with China? What he ended up doing is, under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military, basically sold us out when a policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the
They buy our
competition for the
water.
21st
They're buying all our
century, which
fucking
means
water.
focusing on the details of what that requires, focusing on relationships with our allies, focusing on investing in American-based technology so that we win the race on AI, on quantum computing, focusing on what we need to do to support America's workforce so that we don't end up having on the short end of the stick in terms of workers' rights. But what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this, with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet. Thank you, President Xi, exclamation point, when we know that Xi was responsible for lacking and not giving us transparency about the origins of COVID.
President Trump, I'll let you respond.
First of all, they bought their chips from Taiwan. We hardly make chips anymore because of philosophies like they have and policies like they have. I don't say her because she has no policy. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat. She's gone to my philosophy. But if she ever got elected, she'd change it. And it will be the end of our country. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well. But when you look at what she's done to our country, and when you look at these millions and millions of people that are pouring into our country monthly, where it's, I believe, 21 million people, not the 15 that people say, and I think it's a lot higher than the 21. That's bigger than New York State pouring in. And just look at what they're doing to our country. They're criminals. Many of these people coming in are criminals. And that's bad for our economy, too. You know, you mentioned before, we'll talk about immigration later. Well, bad immigration is the worst thing that can happen to our economy. They have, and she has, destroyed our country with policy that's insane. Almost policy that you say they have to hate our country.
President Trump, thank you. Lindsay?
I want to turn to the issue of abortion. President Trump, you've often touted that you were able to kill Roe v. Wade last year. You said that you were proud to be the most pro-life president in American history. Then last month, you said that your administration would be great for women and their reproductive rights. In your home state of Florida, you surprised many with regard to your 6-week abortion ban because you initially had said that it was too short. And you said, quote, I'm going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. But then the very next day, you reversed course. You would vote to support the 6-week ban. Vice President Harris says that women shouldn't trust you on the issue of abortion because you've changed your position so many times. Therefore, why
just say one. The reason I'm doing that vote is because the plan is, and you know the vote is, they have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, is doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. The Democrats are radical in that. And her vice presidential pick, which I think was a horrible pick, by the way, for our country, because he is really out of it. But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me, hence the vote. But what I did is something for 52 years. They've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states. And through the genius and heart and strength of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do that. Now, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. I believe strongly in it. Ronald Reagan did also. 85% of Republicans do. Exceptions. Very important. But we were able to get it, and now states are voting on it. And for the first time, you're going to see, look, this is an issue that's torn our country apart for 52 years. Every legal scholar, every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative, they all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote. And that's what happened. Now, Ohio, the vote was somewhat liberal. Kansas, the vote was somewhat liberal, much more liberal than people would have thought. But each individual state is voting. It's the vote of the people now. It's not tied up in the federal government. I did a great service in doing it. It took courage to do it. And the Supreme Court had great courage in doing it. And I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
That is a wrong fact check. It absolutely happens.
A monitor that would be monitoring your pregnancies, your miscarriages. I think the American people believe
Those are all
that
lies.
certain freedoms,
Every
in
single thing
particular the
she
freedom
said
to make
is a lie.
decisions about one's own body, should not be made by the government.
Take a drink of
Thank you,
water.
Vice President Harris.
Well, there she goes again. It's a lie. I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban, because we've gotten what everybody wanted. Democrats, Republicans, and everybody else, and every legal scholar wanted it to be brought back into the states, and the states are voting. And it may take a little time, but for 52 years, this issue has torn our country apart, and they've wanted it back in the states. And I did something that nobody thought was possible. The states are now voting. What she says is an absolute lie. And as far as the abortion ban, no, I'm not in favor of abortion ban, but it doesn't matter, because this issue has now been taken over by the states.
Would you veto a national abortion ban if it came
Well, I
to
won't
that?
have to, because again, and 2 things. Number one, she said she'll go back to Congress. She'll never get the vote. It's impossible for her to get the vote, especially now with the 50-50, and essentially 50-50 in both Senate and the House. She's not going to get the vote. She can't get the vote. She won't even come close to it. So it's just talk. You know what it reminds me of? When they said they're going to get student loans terminated, and it ended up being a total catastrophe. The student loans, and then her, I think probably her boss, if you call him a boss, he spends all his time on the beach. But look, her boss went out and said, we'll do it again. We'll do it a different way. He went out, got rejected again by the Supreme Court. So all these students got taunted with this whole thing about this whole idea. And how unfair that would have been, part of the reason they lost, to the millions and millions of people that had to pay off their student loans. They didn't get it for free. But they were saying it's the same way that they talked about that they talk about abortion.
But if I could just get a yes.
Okay, so, you know, I mean, I don't want to tell the whole thing, but I thought Trump was strong. His arguments are right on.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I heard some people say,
That's what I said. He said he got the issue put down into the states, right? It's like there's no reason for Texans to be writing laws for New York, or for New Yorkers to be writing laws for Texas, right? It's like
right,
they're different.
that's right. And if you can't find the state you need, just look for the state that lets you. It's easy.
Okay, but look, like, I still view this as a
About a little
issue, right?
responsibility.
It's like, you know, the worst possible case says it's some woman in South Dakota who has to travel to Detroit or to New York City more than once or twice for abortions. Might decide she'd be happier living in Detroit or New York City and not come back, right? That's the worst case. Nobody's going to die from that. But I guarantee you, the first time you ever see a hydrogen bomb blow off,
Yeah.
you know, because somebody like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden is in the White House, then you're gonna say you're gonna forget all about the abortion issue. You say abortion, what's that, man? I mean, I don't know. See, goddamn, look at that hydrogen bomb blowing off. I just took a major city out.
Right.
It doesn't exist anymore. If you blew something like that off in the middle of Los Angeles, you wouldn't be able to tell there'd ever been a city there.
Exactly. No, that's true, Ted.
You know, even a 10 megaton bomb like that first hydrogen bomb they ever blew off.
Yeah.
You ever read that account?
Yes.
You read the story about those people who saw that first hydrogen bomb blow off? You know, they were 100 miles away. You know, they were in a bunker, sandbags and typewriters and all this equipment and everything. 100 miles, that's like from Washington, D.C. to Richmond, Virginia, right? Or from Victoria, Texas to Houston, right? And they said it went from being 45 degrees outside to being 105 degrees. There were sandbags lying all over the place, typewriters lying all over the place, and they're lying there on their asses.
Yeah. Yeah.
From just, the Russians have hydrogen bombs which are more like 50 or 75 or 100 megatons.
Well, Operation Dominic was the very last series of tests that they did right after the Russians blew off the Tsar bomb. Remember that?
Yeah.
They lit off a 50 megaton warhead. It ended up being 57 megatons. But I discovered, well, I got it from Joe Farrell, but he discovered that in the very last test of this series, as an interesting little thing, tidbit, they let off, you can see they let off a bunch of them. When you get to the very last one, it's really interesting what it says here. It says that target accuracy within 100 feet, U.S. nuclear weapon airdrop reportedly 99.9% clean. Well, if that means what I think it means, then they found a new way to ignite the H-bomb where they didn't have to use an A-bomb as the trigger. They used shock waves from an anode. So that must mean that nuclear radiation as the atom bomb. That's all I wanted to say.
In the case of a hydrogen bomb, I don't think you need to worry about radiation.
And this brought on a whole new kind of, they can do cold fusion. They just won't let us have it. And it also, you can be used in propulsion. It just got to be rotated. It's called Operation Ripple. I didn't know a lot about it until just recently. But that's pretty interesting, isn't it?
Right. Greg, I had something else I wanted to talk to you about tonight.
All right, let me just stop this one, and we'll start a new one. Hold on.
Okay.
I'm going to stop recording because that. All right, folks, that's the end of that. Now we're going to get into some different stuff. Sorry about leaving my mic on. I won't let that happen again. That was kind of fun to do. Now back to the show. This is about Rome and what could happen to us. It's pretty telling. Empires have always succumbed to the same disease. With each new conquest, Rome thrust forward her frontiers and retreated from her principles. The first Romans were simple people, wholly devoted to their land and their gods. The pilgrims, the settlers, and the sages were succeeded by a promiscuous mob that capitalized on the victories. The growing number of slaves and the afflux of the poor swelled the population. The patricians found their chances for survival considerably reduced as hordes of former slaves, freed and newly wealthy, fought over their estates. For the Romans, all things reflected their greatness. The victories of Marius, Pompey, and Caesar, but also empire, victory, and the future of the Roman people. But there is neither justice in the courts nor honesty in their elections. Only one standard decided the merit of a candidate or the innocence of a defendant: gold. The spectacles of the circus served to distract the populace. The free wheat and olives distributed to the needy at the Forum served as subterfuge for social reform. The aristocracy purchased seats in the Senate, the magistracy of the empire, and the spoils of victory went to the senators, the consuls, the praetors, the quaesitors, the censors, and their wives. Rome had become a corporation. The government was in the hands of a few opulent families of the world of finance, supported by the military junta. These families knew how to protect their interests. They disguised them as national necessities.
The preservation of Rome was identified with that of the ruling families. The Roman people consisted of a small oligarchy of landowners, bankers, speculators, merchants, artisans, adventurers, and tatterdemalions, avid for pleasure, excitement, and sudden gain, proud, turbulent, corrupted by the life of the city, and placing their own interests ahead of even the most salutary reform. The national honor of the Roman Empire was nothing more than the caprices or the indulgences of the rulers of the moment, its political institutions no more than the cupidity of its dignitaries and the indolence of its masses. Its history nothing more than a series of petty larcenies and more important crimes. And then the GRACCHI brothers, nephews of Scipion the Africanus, appeared on the scene. The elder brother, Tiberius, 160 to 133 BC, son of consul and born a patrician, had been raised by Greek philosophers, Blasius of Cumes and Diophanes of Mytilene. He was a veteran of the Spanish campaign. He was elected a tribune. His fortitude, his temperance, his humanity, his passion for justice, and his natural eloquence elicited the admiration of Cicero. It was evident that he would make his mark in politics. Tiberius was as calm as sober, and as moderate as his brother Gaius was vehement, impassioned, and impetuous. He worked for Italy, for the people, and for liberty. He would not be stopped by either threats or clamor. On Rogation Day, he addressed the people massed around the tribune, a fragment of this speech in which he invoked the misery and the helplessness of the people. Depopulation of Italy and the rapacity of the wealthy has been preserved. The landowners in mourning dress appeared on the forum in the most wretched and humble condition in order to move the people whom they despoiled so mercilessly to pity. But they had little confidence in his demonstration, and they hired assassins to kill Tiberius. Tiberius nevertheless proceeded with his reforms. One of his laws authorized the people to circulate freely on the roads and highways. Oh, they couldn't do that? Another stipulated that the treasure of Attila, who had made the Roman people his heir, would be distributed among the citizens. Other laws distributed lands, subsidized the cost of the first planting, decreased the length of military service, and reorganized the judiciary. Henceforth, no Roman citizen could own more than 750 acres of public land for himself, and 375 for each of his sons. The law threatened the owners of the largest herd. In his speeches, Tiberius declared the will of the people was the supreme authority of the state. This was too much. On the day of his re-election to the tribunate, which would have enabled Tiberius to complete his reforms, Scipion Nasica, one of the richest of the landowners, assembled all of the wealthy Romans, followed by an army of slaves and clients that climbed to the Capitol. One of Tiberius' colleagues, a tribune, dealt him the first blow. Other assassins finished the job. His body was profaned and thrown into the Tiber. Rome, which had found senators to assassinate him, found no historian to stigmatize his assassins. After centuries of law and order, the empire watched with stupefaction as the violence of a faction that had taken the law into its own hands not only went unpunished, but was admired. Gaius, GRACCHI, 152 to 121 BC, 8 years younger than his brother, appeared to accept his death, to be unaware of the identities of his assassins. He was appointed Quisitor of Sardinia, and against the wishes of the Senate, he did not disappear from view. He lived the life of his soldiers and looked after their interests. He liked long marches and took long, lonely swims in the sea, and he remained chaste. A fate of his brother and his reforms that proved that it was vain to attempt to remedy the ills of Rome without first having destroyed, or at least humiliated, the large landowners and the usurpers of the public domain. That the idea of transforming the poor people of Rome into a landowning class was too simple and in reality not very effective. But once the terror had disappeared, the little people of Rome began to seek a protector, and the victim's brother, who was known for his virtues and was already suspect to the wealthy, appeared to be just the person they needed. The persistent hatred of the nobility precipitated him into the fray. Although he had no intention of taking up his brother's reforms, boldly Gaius ran for the office of tribune and was elected. He immediately proved that he was no ordinary man. He denounced his brother's assassins and punished them. He promulgated the laws that Tiberius would have wanted. He cited Tiberius incessantly in his speeches. He was re-elected a tribune. He reduced the authority of the Senate. He controlled everything, organized everything, imparting his prodigious activity and his indefatigable energy to everyone. He was craftier than his brother. He had learned from him, and he had time to meditate his revenge without beclouding his mind. For a long while, he retained the support of the wealthy by proposing laws that pleased the rich and others that suited the poor. But eventually he voiced the idea that he had so long meditated in silence. All Italians should be given the rights of citizens. Rome would be the capital of a vast Italic nation. No longer would the empire be founded on a municipal oligarchy allied with the corrupt merchants, but on rival classes working in partnership. The former centers of civilization and the wealth and the multitudes that poured into Rome would be restored. The former centers of civilization and commerce, now destroyed or declined, would be restored, and the wealth and the multitudes that poured into Rome, threatening to choke the nerve center of the empire, would be distributed evenly throughout different lands. It was the historic task of Rome that Gaius had in mind, but he thought could accomplish alone what it was to take 6 generations to achieve. His grandiose ideas were too premature. His plan to accord the rights of a Roman citizen to all Italians pleased neither the nobility nor the little people. The Senate decided that things had gone far enough. The consul Lucian Opimius led the conspiracy. Pursued and about to be taken, Gaius killed himself in a wood dedicated to the Furies. Septimius cut off his head. Gaius, in his turn, was thrown into the Tiber, along with 3,000 of his followers. The year of Gaius's death, the grape harvest was exceptionally good. The nobles, the wealthy, the big and the small landowners bought up all the slaves on the market. The GRACCHI brothers were the last true aristocrats of Rome. Licinius robbed the aristocracy of its traditional energy and its virtues. Most of their laws were abolished. The robber barons rid the Roman Empire of all the leaders who had dreamed of being generous, or simply of being just. Balbinius, Emilian, Valerian, Aurelius, and Maximus were assassinated in their turn. Probus lasted 6 years, Tactius 10 months, and Pertinax 97 days. 16 centuries later, Machiavelli wrote that men forget the death of their father more easily than the loss of their patrimony, and they hesitate less to harm a man who is loved than another who is feared. Later, after Honorius, the frontiers of the empire were overrun by the barbarians. The empire, invaded, was split asunder, and Rome faded into oblivion. The GRACCHI brothers were not forgotten by the Roman people. Statues were erected in their memory, and a cult was founded in their honor.
This movie. The first one, I don't really care. I mean, I could do it a lot better. I still had the movie maker when I made this. I think this was the last video I made with the movie maker, and that was free. The doggone thing kept crashing, and oh man, I had the worst time with it. And I finally ended up breaking for the program I got now, but you know what? It crashes just as much. I don't think they can ever get that stuff worked out. But it's a lot of memory, you know. My computer's dual quad core, but man, I push it to the extreme. All right, enough babbling. Here comes the movie.
General, I must protest this impetuous decision. A decision, impetuous. Grant calls me impetuous too. A drunkard, sitting there in the White House, calling me impetuous. General, I implore you to reconsider. Think of the men whose lives depend upon you. What do you think I should do, Mule Skinner? Sir, that man doesn't know anything. What do you say, Mule Skinner? Should I go down there or withdraw?
I had him. But this time what I held in my hand wasn't a knife, but the truth.
Well, what's your answer, Mule Skinner? General? You go down there. You're advising me to go into the coulee? Yes, sir. There are no Indians there, I suppose. I didn't say that. There are thousands of Indians down there. And when they get done with you, there won't be nothing left but a greasy spot. This ain't the Washita River, General. And them ain't helpless women and children waiting for you. They're shy and brave and Sioux. You go down there if you got the nerve. Still trying to outsmart me, aren't you, Mule Skinner? You want me to think that you don't want me to go down there, but the subtle truth is you really don't want me to go down there. Well, are you reassured now, Major?
You remember Remember General Custer and controversy that swirled around him back in the 60s or the 70s? I wanted to start this presentation off with the General Custer thing to give a graphical example of how historians can get things wrong. I remember my dad telling me that he was just a crazy, brave general who took unnecessary chances, and I mean, he seemed to know, even with the fact that historical academia was saying that he was this great man that loved the Indians. And he knew better. I think that's always existed. People just know, but they don't really say anything about it. And he was hoisted up as a hero. In the story of the Little Bighorn, a Little Big Man, a movie that was supposedly a history comedy kind of thing, has Custer depicted closer to the true Custer than the Errol Flynn figure. I know that. The witnesses that won the battle, the Indians, were completely ignored by the historians. So I don't really see any battlefield detectives going in there or anything. The Indians said that the battle lasted as long as it took a man to eat his lunch. So I don't really think you could call it a battle. Maybe it was a rout, but Custer severely underestimated the Sioux and the Cheyenne, and they had superior firepower to him. The army wanted to save money, and they had all of these bullets left over from the Civil War for these single-shot carbines that they equipped their troopers with. And the Cheyenne warriors mostly were using Henry rifles and Spencer rifles, you name it. They had a whole gang.
Custer turned down 2
They had
Gatling
everything from
guns.
flintlocks to repeaters. They outgunned and outmanned the U.S. 7th Cavalry. Custer was probably being foolhardy. Plus, it taught the U.S. military a vital lesson that they employed in every war after that. And that is, if you send more ammunition your enemy's way than they can send yours, you'll win the battle every time. For a long time, that's the way it was. And then in the 60s and 70s, it started to come out where, the Indians were starting to be listened to. And then the battlefield detectives went there sometime in the 90s, and they cataloged all of the bullets, and they pretty much knew from the entire schematic of how the bullets were laid out how it went. And the Indians finally are listened to. It's just like myth. The ancients, our historians think that it's just a bunch of nonsense, but yet we still can't duplicate buildings that they made all those years ago. Who knows how long ago, really. That was just an example of how things can be wrong. One party that's in charge doesn't even want to listen to the other side. They say there's 7 layers to truth to everything. And even the layer that was underneath this layer was a Cheyenne saying. The Cheyenne, the Crow, and the Sioux were the ones, the main tribes that did the fighting. And the Cheyenne saying was, the Crow got the land, the Sioux got the glory, and we did the fighting and dying. I don't know how true that is, but the Cheyennes were called the human beings because they understood that a human being is the highest form of life on the earth that we know of, but we sure don't act like it. How could you control 7 billion people if you are only maybe at the most a few dozen? How could you do it? Well, what immediately comes to mind is that you somehow circumvent things so that you can turn them all against each other and make them fight each other. We call that playing both ends against the middle. And the more one delves into the mainstream chronology of historical events, the more one scratches one's head as to what is up with all this. Why is all of this getting ignored? There's that word again. Ignorant. Seems to be pretty rampant in the academic circles. Have you ever heard something and dismissed it right away as being ridiculous, only to find out later that it was true?
and more than likely the case. But back to my point, how would you do it? How would you be able to control 7 billion humans and you only have a couple of dozen? Well, the answer is pretty easy. And you got to leave anything about love or togetherness out of the picture. That's just lip service, while you do everything else contrary to that. I recently come across a group who is researching the work of Anatoly Fomenko. Russians are interesting because they don't march to the beat of the Western drums. They march to their own beat. They gather their own evidence. And honestly, they're more honest and forthcoming than Western historians or scientists or cosmologists. They seem to really want to know the truth in certain cases, but they have their elements to deal with too. Since childhood, it's drummed into all of our heads that the Russians are bad people. And if you subscribe to anything they like, then you're a commie rat or whatever, a traitor. It's just propaganda. Anatoly Fomenko, working with the theory our history has been drastically changed. And of course, I put on my critical thinker's cap because of what I know about the story and cosmology. Plus, my interest always gets aroused when there is a controversy. It's just a thirst for knowledge, and that may not be conventional.
To the sun god of the Egyptians, Osiris.
The new chronology is a theory which argues that the conventional chronology of Middle Eastern and European history is fundamentally flawed, and that events attributed to the civilizations of Rome, ancient Greece, and ancient Egypt actually occurred during the Middle Ages, more than 1,000 years later. The central concepts of new chronology are derived from the ideas of Russian scholar Nikolai Morozov, 1854 to 1946, although work by French scholar Jean Hardin, 1646 to 1729, can be viewed as an earlier predecessor. However, the new chronology is most commonly associated with the Russian mathematician Anatoly Fomenko. So there's a mathematician that's actually doing good work, born in 1945. Although published works on the subject are actually a collaboration between Fomenko and several other mathematicians, the concept is most fully explained in history, fiction, or science, originally published in 7 volumes. Seems he has a lot to say.
Is it possible that ancient Rome, Greece and Egypt were invented during Renaissance? Can it be that Jesus Christ was born in 1053 AD and crucified in 1086 AD? History, fiction or science? Describes how the contemporary chronological scale was created and by whom. With the culprits named as the 16th-17th century clergy. The well-known model of history has enjoyed the relentless attention of prominent critics ever since its creation, including respected people like Sir Isaac Newton and Jean Hardin, the court librarian of Louis XIV, the Sun King of France.
It's probably all examples and proof. The new chronology also contains a reconstruction, an alternative chronology, radically shorter than the standard historical timeline, because all ancient history is quote-unquote folded onto the Middle Ages. According to Fomenko's claims, the written story of humankind goes only as far back as AD 800. There is almost no information about events between 800 and 1000, and most known historical events took place in AD 1000 to 1500. New chronology is rejected by mainstream historians, of course, and is inconsistent with absolute and relative dating techniques used in the wider scholarly community. The majority of scientific commentators consider new chronology to be pseudo-scientific. That's no surprise to me. The history of new chronology, the idea of chronologies that differ from the conventional chronology, can be traced back to at least the early 17th century. No, isn't that a coincidence? We'll get into the mainstream concept of the Gregorian calendar in another chapter. Jean Hardoon then suggested that many ancient historical documents were much younger than commonly believed to be. In 1685, he published a version of Pliny the Elder's Natural History, in which he claimed that most Greek and Roman texts had been forged by the Benedictine monks. When later questioned on these results, Hardoon stated that he'd reveal the monks' reasons in a letter to be revealed only after his death. And guess what happened? You don't really have to guess too hard. The executors of his estate were unable to find such a document among his posthumous papers. In the 17th century, Sir Isaac Newton, examining the current chronology of ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and the ancient Near East, expressed discontent with prevailing theories, and in the chronology of ancient kingdoms proposed one of his own, which, based on its study on Apollonius of Rhodes' Argonautica, changed the traditional dating of the Argonautic expedition, the Trojan War, and the founding of Rome. In 1887, Edwin Johnson expressed the opinion that early Christian history was largely invented or corrupted in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. In 1909, Otto Rank made note of duplications in literary history of a variety of culture. Almost all civilized peoples have early woven myths around and glorified in pottery their heroes, mythical kings and princes, founders of religion, dynasties, empires, and cities. In short, their national heroes, especially the history of their birth and of their early years, is furnished with fantastic traits with a PH. The amazing similarity, nay, literal identity of these tales, often if they refer to different, completely independent peoples, sometimes geographically far removed from one another, is well known and has struck many an investigator. There's more, so check out New Chronology Flamenco on Wikipedia for the mainstream story. One of the things that Mr. Flamenco is claiming, the historical chronology of events, 1,000 years has been added to the timeline. There's a young lady, her name is Sylvia. She does a lot of videos on a YouTube channel called New Earth. And don't let her young sounding voice and accent throw you off. She's very well traveled, very smart, and knows what she's talking about. Watch this.
That contains all old maps. One must work hard to find different fragments here and there, and in most cases the maps are published in very low resolution so that one cannot read the small details, And also that makes it harder to notice the places where the scientists and not by historians.
So when there's nobody around to stop religion, you see what they can do.
In more ancient time, the forces of evil, the parasitic forces, fought humanity openly, and everybody knew who fights whom. In more recent times, they completely changed their tactics. Now they don't show their faces openly, and they only operate through a relatively small number of humans who know everything and are members of the top levels of various secret societies. The rest of the population of the earth has been rendered so senseless and so unaware of its real nature and history as a result of the fraudulent propaganda of the parasites, which has been reshaping our views for many centuries, that most of us have become not people but sheeple, blindly following our so-called elected leaders. Although social surveys from all over the world all point to the fact that most of the people on this planet consider their government leaders to be total scam and fraud and criminals, still those very same people watch TV every day, TV which is censored by that same honest government. And these very same people believe the school books, although these school books have been instituted as true by that same government. The social institution of a country or a state developed at this point of time when the parasites manage to convince certain group of people to go against their own brothers. Then the need appeared for those groups to fence up parts of the earth as their own and call them states and countries. All this is described in the Vedas as the beginning of the dark ages of Kali Yuga. Before that, there were only provinces of the great empire of the survivors. And even that so-called empire was not an empire the way we imagine it nowadays. It was not a country that kept its citizens like slaves, like the modern countries. People were free and they owned the land they were born on. Finally, sometimes in the 16th and 17th century, the parasites managed to corrupt a group of the humans on the territory of Western Europe, and those started carrying out their plan of creating countries and states that were absolutely independent from territories that abided the law of goodness, the laws brought to them by the survivors or those educated by them directly or not. The parasites managed to appoint their own people, which were rebels and insurgent kings, who manipulated the public opinion with lies and false religion-based slogans. According to the law of that time, kings who did not have proper right to the throne, who were insurgents, they had to be punished by death. That is why these newly appointed rulers desperately needed a new history that will make their claim to the throne seem legitimate. All this was centrally orchestrated by the parasites, and that is why a very similar scenario happened almost in each and every European country. And that is when Scaliger was ordered to create a new history that would be convenient to the insurgent rulers, who in exchange for being placed on the throne by fraud, vowed in loyalty to the dark forces, who eventually would carry through them warfare against the citizens of these countries. Let's get into the details of how the history of a full planet was shifted, for example, with 1,000 years back in time. In the Middle Ages, people used to write years in a different way, not the way we write them now. There were two ways in the Middle Ages to write the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. One was the I. In some cases, the letter I, or in Slavic the letter X, was completely omitted. Like, for example, on this map, the cartographer absolutely clearly writes that this is something referring to year 740 and 750, and yet the mainstream historians conveniently place it in year 1740 and 1750. And this is not the only such example. An old emblem of the city found out that this Caligula history was founded on books that are not genuine. Actually, the list of scholars who doubted the genuineness of the theory of Caligula is very, very long and continues to get longer nowadays very quickly. I have included it for your reference in the description of this video, and I would highly recommend that you have a look
Yeah,
at
this
it.
is where I found
There
the
are many
information about
contemporary
the
scholars
Celestians.
listed
There's a lot
that
of good
also
authors here.
maintain their websites. Some of them could be in your native language.
Gunnar Heinzen is good. He has a presentation he does. If you haven't seen it, definitely recommend it. I'll get the link. She's good. If you'll notice, all of them are older or are already gone. That's why it's very important for young people to get a hold of this information.
best that I can make it out is that the wrong people got put in charge after the last cataclysm. It was probably planned. Who knows?
But the 1,000 years shift back in history was not the only shift. Actually, it was one out of the many. Local regional shifts of the histories of individual countries were also needed, and it all depended on what kind of forgery they can do to misplace the particular regional events in a way that people will naively believe it. Let's see one example. This is a document by the famous writer Lermontov. It is used as a proof for dating historic events. It is shown in the textbooks a very low resolution. There are dates indeed on this document, and it is actually an authentic document with the authentic writing of the famous author. However, if you pay a close attention to the numbers used to write the years, you will notice something strange. The number 3 is very unusual in both cases. If we see other documents of Lermontov, we can notice that he writes 3 in a completely different manner. It is becoming pretty obvious that the 7 has been made artificially to look like 3, and in this way given historical event has been sent back in time with 40 years. This is how our so-called history was fabricated. Sending events back in time is extremely convenient for the parasites. It creates the illusion that things have always been like this. It creates the feeling of helplessness in the common people. They feel that they're being oppressed and manipulated. However, the authority of the parasites, represented by our rulers, so-called elected rulers, seems strong and long established. Not only the bloody parasitic phase in our history seems stronger and longer, but also the times when people were actually free seem even more distant and more elusive, as if they never existed. I have traveled a lot in my life, and in all countries, people are not happy with their rulers. They do not feel that the presidents and the governments are representing their real will. And yet, they feel powerless to do anything because they think that it has always been like this. One of the main purposes of this video is to make known to people, no, it was not like this always. And the times when we were free are much, much closer than everybody would expect. Mainstream history assures these are nothing else but devious, evil institutions created by the parasites with the sole purpose of organizing suicidal wars amongst people.
For example, scientists, Americanologists like Leonard Adam, Carl Gensi, Paul Rivet, Jose Imbellione, and many others, studied the Asian American parallels in art. They observed clear similarities in the motives, ornaments, and stylized design of cultural artifacts between East Asia on one hand and the northwest coast of America and Mexico on the other.
The similarities between the styles were too close for them to develop independently, just like that by chance.
Later on, German and Austrian anthropologists who created the theory of the Kulturkreis, or culture circle or cultural field, people like Grabner, Schmidt, Ankerman, Cooper, and others
tried to prove that the cultures of all the nations around the globe originated from 7 or 8 successive waves of migration of a gigantic scale emanating from a certain mysterious center which should be located somewhere in Europe or Asia.
And these anthropologists concluded, unfortunately, nearly all of the parallels that we presented are of no use, as the chronological gap between them spans over many centuries. If, let's say, the lotus pattern from Amaravati, India, date to the 2nd century BC, their Mexican doubles from Chichen Itza were created somewhere around in the 12th century AD. In Cambodia, the step pyramid design appeared for the first time only in the 10th century AD, whereas in Mesoamerica that happened in the early 1st century BC.
And it was only the mistaken Scaliger chronology which hindered these historians. Their observations about...
Funny thing about doing research is that the more you research something, like that poster says, the more crazy you look to ignorant people. I don't mean ignorant in a dumb sense, I just mean ignorant in a sense that they don't pay attention. Your average person would think any of this stuff is in left field. They just don't know any better. And that was probably the same case back then when they brought the new calendars out. I mean, this is totally feasible. It's in line with so many other things, too. It may be the reason why some people think that Velikovsky is wrong, but it turns out that he's not. This next guy that's going to talk for a few minutes, his name is Gunnar Heinsohn, and he is finding the same results.
Like this, we are in a period 600 years later in my chronology. That's a shorter one by 700 years, and 1,300 years later in mainstream chronology. You get an impression how far-reaching the catastrophe had struck. Here we see something even earlier from 70 BCE. That's the so-called mechanism of Antikythera, and it was an instrument for predicting astronomical positions, eclipses, and the cycles of the Olympic Games. So this is what you see in essence in the museum. I took the photo last month. And this is a reconstruction of this instrument, and it could show you the position of every planet, the sun and the moon in the sky. This is the kind of knowledge that we lost. And the loss of this knowledge brings me, or at least you, to the question, so how was a return to counting of the years managed? Now, I believe in a very simple one. I'm not in favor of falsification, of faking, of just creation out of the blue sky. I think when the catastrophe shook somewhere around the 930s, and there was no scientific activity up to the 970s, 980s, maybe longer, then someday people would start counting the years again. And what did they know for sure was they were after Christ, that they understood. And I think they decided to choose a year as a new year one. And this year one is turned later in the year 1000. And why 1000 years? They might have thought, because in the Revelation of John again it is said that after 1,000 years Christ and the devil in the valley of Armageddon will battle out the final fight in a major catastrophe. And maybe, it's a speculation, this catastrophe of the 10th century was seen as this: after 1,000 years, the devil and Christ are fighting it out. And so they had a basis for a year one. And only later arrived the desire to fill these 1,000 years with history. And that's when the composition began. So the authors had the very few sources on their table, and they had to put them in a sequence. Even in actuality, they lived in parallel. And this brings me to a few questions my son has asked. And I will focus on Christianity. The most important figure of Christianity is Paul the Apostle, Saul of Tarsus, a Jew from Tarsus. And he directed a radical movement all the way from Israel through Asia Minor to Greece and Rome without non-Christian sources ever mentioning him. It's a major problem in Christian history that the most important character, Paulus, is not known outside of the Christian books. But there's something interesting. 700 years after Paul, there's a major movement they call themselves the Paulicians, the followers of Paul. And they are in Asia Minor. They are right there where Paul was traveling and founding his churches and writing his letters to. And they are persecuted, they are killed. So there was a movement following Paul. And what is interesting in this movement, in the 8th century, they are still not Trinitarians. They still only believe in God. They don't think that Jesus or the Holy Spirit are godlike. And that's the theology of Paul. Paul didn't believe in Trinity, so he did not consider Jesus as a God. He only considered God as a God. So we have here two very similar movements side by side, but now separated by several hundred years. And if you bring back the sources used to fill 1,000 years from the vertical into the horizontal, suddenly you get real stories, you get real narratives. So here is Paul, and here is his movement. Another question is the most famous figure that will be the end of the lecture, King Arthur of Camelot. Everybody has seen movies about King Arthur of Camelot, and what do the historians tell us? John Myers, one of the leading British archaeologists of the last century, no figure on the borderline of history and mythology has wasted more of the historian's time. And if you write to the museum in the city of Camulodunum, you think it sounds like Camelot, Camulodunum, it's Colchester, and you ask them, isn't there a relation between King Arthur and King Atze of Camulodunum? They say, no, that's impossible. What do they say? Eastern England lay in the heart of the region first occupied by the Saxons, so cannot have been the area in which Arthur operated. Acting as a military leader of the Britons, Celtic, indigenous Britons, the invading Saxons, any historical Arthur would have been operating outside the area of primary Saxon settlement. So they believe that all these areas were full of fully armed Saxons, and so Arthur could not have operated there. But you remember in the lecture that in actual fact, there's nothing. There's not even agriculture for the Saxons from 400, 500 to 900. So Saxons were there. And what is interesting in the Saxons is that they have pottery from the late Latine period, 1st century before Christ. And this is the period of Atze of Camulodunum. He lives in the 1st century BC, and he has this pottery and he has his coins. And here's the name in Greek on his coins, A-T-H-T-H, Atze. It's called Atze. So it's Atze of Camulodunum. And now that you understand, he shares the same pottery with the Saxons that are dated to the time of Arthur, but are actually some 700 years earlier. What happened? When Julius Caesar attacked the British Isles in the 1st century BCE, he was not alone in trying to conquer the British Isles. He was competing with the Germans from the areas of Hamburg, Bremen, Flensburg. They were much closer, they were much better equipped to take the islands than the British. So they were fighting each other, and the local people, the Celtic, the Britons, they were in between. And they made an alliance with the Romans to fight off the Saxons. Thus, when Arthur of Camelot, who is Atze of Camulodunum, was fighting in the 1st century BCE, he was defending his own land. The Saxons were trying to take it. They had not yet settled there. They were trying to take it. They took it. He lost the battle. So we have another explanation here. And the final question of my son, it's one of the major enigmas of Jewish history. Ashkenazi Jews, they begin in the High Middle Ages, after 930 Common Era. Later they move to Poland, everywhere else. And the problem is that in the early Middle Ages, in their original area, in Germany, Belgium, France, in this area, there is no archaeological evidence for Jews from the 8th to the 10th century. So there's a hiatus of 300 years before the High Middle Ages. So they say if the Ashkenazi Jews begin here, and there are no Jews whatsoever in synagogue architecture for 300 years, they have nobody who could have been their forefathers. We have the same situation like in Jerusalem, where the Crusaders massacre Jews and Muslims, but in the stratigraphy of Jerusalem, you do not have Jews before this massacre occurs. So now when you understand that the Antiquity, late Antiquity, and early Middle Ages periods are not chronologically but stratigraphically like this, then all the hard evidence for Jews in this period belongs also to this period, where supposedly there is no hard evidence, which means that the Ashkenazi Jews are immediate followers of the Jews of the period that is now divided in Antiquity, late Antiquity, and early Middle Ages, but in actuality is one. Thank you for your attention.
scheme. Almost. The Gregorian calendar differs from the solar year by 26 seconds per year. Despite Lilius' ingenious method for syncing the calendar, several hours has arisen. By the year 4909, the Gregorian calendar will be a full day ahead of the solar year, and by then we will be ancients. Some Protestants viewed the Gregorian calendar as a Catholic plot. Though Pope Gregory's papal bull reforming the calendar had no power beyond the Catholic Church, Catholic countries, including Spain, Portugal, and Italy, swiftly adopted the new system for their civil affairs. European Protestants, however, largely rejected the change because of its ties to the papacy, fearing it was an attempt to silence their movement. It wasn't until 1700 that Protestant Germany switched over, and England held out until 1752. Orthodox countries clung to the Julian calendar until even later, and their national well, that doesn't surprise me. In fact, you could use them as a reverse barometer for what they're saying. That in itself makes me think that there's something going on that makes them very uncomfortable. When they do that, that's the same sign you get all across the board, that they're acting out of a knee-jerk reaction of fear. Because if they were as confident in their theories as they say they are, then they would welcome any challenge to their information. But this is a usual tactic. They criticize and, stick them with the label of pseudoscience, or, just put it in the mystery bag and we don't have to look at it. They don't like new information because it threatens their bank account. And they probably have philosophy of, why should I look at that and give up my home and car and have to go back to school and learn the right thing? I'm going to look into this. This looks pretty ripe for the picking.
O2 is on deck. It's coming.
All right. The sentence is death.
Oh yeah, that was pretty good. I enjoyed that. I haven't watched that in a couple of years. All right, I'm gonna put on a little slideshow and find number 2. This movie was taken down on me, and I had to redo it because it had 30 seconds of music they found on it that was copywritten, and after I think I had 100,000 views on this. After 100,000, or after so many thousands of views, I think it's 10. You can't make changes to it anymore. You can't edit it. That's the story, and I'm sticking to it. All right. Why is this? This one's a little more current. Are 1,000 years missing in our history? According to Professor Gunnar Heinsohn, there is, amongst others, and Immanuel Velikovsky. According to Professor Heinsohn, 700 years are missing in the 1st century AD. All the architecture is the same. The basilica, site building, far as digging down and finding the 6th century and then digging a little further in 5th and 4th and so on. 35,000 archaeological sites, and not one of them shows at all. They're all right next to each other. He pretty much just dunks it. It's hard to refute, but they had some good times in the Roman times. Bathroom situation was pretty damn barbaric. One learns the real reason stilts were invented. That's a good one. They'd just have a shat right there out on the street. All right, well, let's start out with a few things. You know, most of us thought that there was this big 2 million year ice age. Some Neanderthals appeared, punctuated with a brief period where a species of humanoid called Cro-Magnon came and apparently went, but not before they were able to go down into the caves all over Europe, paint these ridiculously good paintings, even though their brains were bigger than modern humans. They disappeared.
Lord, it's a miracle! Vanished like a fart in the wind.
That in itself is a head scratcher for me. Gunnar says that these 3 cataclysms that they are saying happened in the 2nd, 6th, and 9th centuries are actually just 1. 3 have been reported. The evidence does not say that. The Vikings, the sailing people, they didn't get square sails until 700 years after the Romans had them, which doesn't make sense. The Vikings were a sea people. The buildings, the language, the wares, glass, pottery, the same, all over the board. When you cross-reference the study of ancient history, and where were the pirates? Just using mainstream, it's pretty easy to see that there was indeed some major bleepery going on back then. 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. So what we'll do is we'll summarize some key figures and events. We'll look at Joseph Scaliger, the Reformation, and the 30 Years' War. And we'll take a look at some of Fomenko's findings. Let's get going. Baalbek. This is an essay from Velikovsky. In the valley that gives birth to 2 rivers of Syria, the Orontes flowing to the north and the Litani flowing to the south and west, between the mountains of Lebanon and anti-Lebanon, where roads from Palestine in the south, Damascus in the east, and the sea coast there to Hamath in Upper Syria, lie the ruins of Baalbek. When we compare ruins of Baalbek with those of many ancient cities, which we visited in Italy, Greece, Egypt, and in other parts of Asia and Africa, We cannot help thinking to be the remains of the boldest plan we ever saw attempted in architecture. Is it not strange, then, that the age and the undertaker of the works in which solidity and duration have been so remarkably consulted should be a matter of such obscurity? From the time when this was first written, in the 50s of the 18th century, up until today, nothing was added to dispel the obscurity which envelops the origin of this temple city. The excavations undertaken there brought no solution to the problem of its origin or the nature of its cult. No early inscriptions were found. Throngs of travelers who spend their day wandering among the ruins of a magnificent acropolis go away without having heard what the role of the place was in ancient times, when it was built, or who was the builder. The pyramids, the temples of Karnak or Luxor, the Forum, and Circus Maximus in Rome were erected by builders. Identity is generally known. The marvelous site in the valley on the junction of roads running to Hamath is a work of anonymous authors in unknown ages. It is as if some mysterious people brought the mighty blocks and placed them in front of the snow-capped Lebanon and went away unnoticed. The inhabitants of the place actually believe that the great stones were brought and put together by Genin, mysterious creatures, intermediate between angels and demons. Solomon's Baalbek,
giant
local
humans.
Tradition, which may be traced to the early Middle Ages, points to a definite period in the past when Baalbek was built, the time of Solomon. Ildrisi, the Arab geographer, wrote, "The great temple city of astonishing appearance was built in the time of Solomon." Ghazwani explained the origin of the edifices of the name of the place by connecting it with Balkis, the legendary queen of the south, and with Solomon. The traveler Robert Wood, who stayed at Baalbek in the 1750s and who published an unsurpassed monograph on its ruins, wrote, "The inhabitants of this country, Mohammedans, Jews, and Christians, all confidently believe that Solomon built both Palmyra and Baalbek." Another traveler who visited Syria in the 80s of the 18th century recorded, "The inhabitants of Baalbek assert that this edifice was constructed by Genin, or genies, in the service of King Solomon." Some scholars looking for Baalbek in the scriptures identified it with Baal-Hamon, referred to in the Song of Songs. And again, Baal-Hamon is supposed to be another name for Baal-Lath or Baal-Jad. Also, Baal-Zaphon, or Zeus Cassius, was proposed as Baalbek. In this connection, it can be said that, according to the Talmud, Jad, G-A-D, was the name of the planet Jupiter, and Zeus Cassius signifies Jupiter of Lebanon. And Haman was supposed to be a Syrian form of the name Ammon, who according to the Greek authors was Zeus Jupiter. All this together, if correct, points toward the cult of Jupiter in Baalbek.
And this place had to have been occupied. Jupiter was still close to the Earth and not exactly a gas giant planet yet, but either a hot Jupiter or a sub-brown dwarf star.
The skeptics. The study of antiquities started as a debate about fraud. Italian scholar Nanni had published fake sources and caused quite a debate, especially because he also introduced the distinction between primary and secondary sources. This man was not an ordinary fraudster, whose discovery might easily be set aside. It took a long chronological debate to find out what was wrong. In the meantime, scholars learned to look for these sources of sources. Although there were hardly any primary sources from antiquity, we might try to approach them. Although the foundations of a more reliable study of the distant past were being laid, the basic response to unmasking of Nanni was skepsis. The 17th century witnessed the rise of a kind of historical skepsis that is sometimes called a historical Pyrrhonism. Ironically, the idea that antiquity could not be understood was named after a philosopher from the very day and age whose works are lost, Pyrrho of Elis, 360 to 270 BC, the founder of a philosophical system called skepsis. His point of departure had been that we cannot fully understand nature. You can see that lightning strikes, but don't hear the sound at the same moment. The straight pole suddenly looks crooked when you put it into a pool of water. Nature is incomprehensible. The implication is that you cannot establish with absolute certainty whether a statement about it is false or true, and that means that it is impossible to establish a system of ethical precepts, at least not if you want to base it on reality. The true lover of wisdom accepted this uncertainty and postponed his judgment. Nothing was certain. The philosophy of Philo, which was only known indirectly, became incredibly popular in the 16th and 17th centuries. The discovery of the Americas had shown that the ancient authorities were not infallible. The Reformation had shown that religious truths were subject to debate, and wars of religion showed the consequences. Skepsis was the true wisdom, and indeed, skeptical authors like Montaigne are still being read. So how much did we know about antiquity? Protestant authors were quick to point out how many Catholic ideas were just plainly wrong. Those papists believe in purgatory, but for that, there's no biblical evidence. The Church of Rome also venerated the saints, but most legends were invented in medieval times. Secular authors started to ask similar questions. What did we actually know about Homer or Socrates? Other scholars had different questions. How much did we know about antiquity? If most of our manuscripts were medieval, Polizeno's ideas about reconstructing ancient texts from medieval manuscripts were not really well known. How could you establish the difference between legend and fact? What actually was a fact? These questions were put forward in books like
François de la Mauvaise du Pays de Certitude, QUILYA dans l'Histoire, on the little certainty we have about the past, 1668, or Louis de Beaufort's Sur l'incertitude des 5 premiers siècles de l'Histoire Romaine,
1738. The uncertainty about the first 5 centuries of Roman history. Often, the examples offered by those authors were quite funny. Why on earth did Romulus have to abduct Sabine women if he really was as handsome as the ancient authors wrote? Much of this criticism was well argued and quite correct. True, Polizeno had created a way to look beyond the medieval copies of the ancient texts. Scaliger had established the basic principles of the study of ancient chronology. As we will see in later installments of this series, the study of inscriptions and coins would more or less corroborate the information of those contested ancient authors. What would a coin have to do with an author? That was the future. In the 17th century, the study of antiquity was in great trouble. The historical purists may have been too skeptical about our knowledge, but they asked a very, very good question.
All of the ancient literary works have been burned.
Joseph Justus Scaliger, August 5th, 1540 to January 21st, 1609, was a French religious leader and scholar known for expanding the notion of classical history from Greek and ancient Roman history to include Persian, Babylonian, Jewish, ancient Egyptian history. He spent the last 16 years of his life in the Netherlands. After his father's death, he spent 4 years at the University of Paris. For 2 months, he found he was not in a position to profit from the lectures of the greatest Greek scholar of the time. He read Homer in 21 days and went through all other Greek poets, orators, historians, forming a grammar for himself as he went along. Don't we all? From Greek, at the suggestion of Jan Postel, he proceeded to attack Hebrew and then Arabic. Of both, he acquired respectable knowledge. His most important teacher was Jean Durac. He was able not only to impart knowledge, but also kindle enthusiasm in Scaliger. It was to Durac that Scaliger owed his home for the next 30 years of his life. For the 1563, the professor recommended him to Louis de Casimir, the young lord of La Roche-Posay, as a companion in his travel Roche-Posay on their way. Scaliger formed an unfavorable opinion of the English. Their inhumane disposition and inhospitable treatment of foreigners especially made a negative impression on him. He was also disappointed in finding only a few Greek manuscripts and a few learned men. Later period, he became intimate with Richard Thompson and other Englishmen in the course of his travels. He had become a Protestant.
On his return to France, he spent 3 years with the Chastainers, accompanying them into their different
chateaus
in Poitou, as the calls of the Civil War required. In 1570, he accepted the invitation of Jacques and proceeded to Valence, jurisprudence under the greatest living jurist. Here he remained 3 years, profiting not only by the lectures but even more by the library of Cujas, which filled no fewer than 7 or 8 rooms and included 500 manuscripts.
The massacre of St. Bartholomew, occurring as he was about to accompany the Bishop of Valence on an embassy to Poland, made Scaliger flee, together with other Huguenots, for Geneva, where he was appointed a professor in the academy. He lectured on the
organon of Aristotle and the De Finibus of Cicero to much satisfaction for the students, but not appreciating it himself. He hated lecturing and was bored with the importunities of the fanatical preachers. And in 1574 he returned to France and made
his home for the next 20 years with Chastainer of his life. During this period we have interesting details and notices in the letters from cases inedite de Joseph Scaliger, edited by
no access to libraries, and frequently separated even from his own books. His life during this period seems most unsuited to study. He had, however, what so few contemporary scholars possessed in leisure, and freedom from financial cares.
I know, right?
Academic output. It was during this period of his life that he composed and published his books of historical criticism. His editions of the Catalecta, 1575, of Festus, 1575, of Catullius, Tabelius, and Propertius, 1577, are the work of a man determined to discover the real meaning and force of his author. He was the first to lay down and apply sound rules of criticism and emendation, and to change textual criticism from a series of haphazard guesses into a rational procedure subject to fixed laws.
Those books are erotic.
Patterson. These works, while proving Scaliger's right
history
to the foremost place among his contemporaries as Latin scholar and critic, did not go beyond mere scholarship. It was reserved for his edition of Manilius, 1579, and his De Emendatione Temporum, 1583, to revolutionize perceived ideas of ancient chronology, to show the ancient history is not confined to that of the Greeks and Romans, but also comprises that of the Persians, Babylonians, and Egyptians, hitherto neglected, and that the Jews, hitherto treated as a thing apart, and that the historical narratives and fragments of each of these, and their several systems of chronology, must be critically compared. It was this innovation that distinguished Scaliger from contemporary scholars. Neither they nor those who immediately followed seem to have appreciated his innovation. Instead, they valued his elementary criticism and his skill in Greek. His commentary on Manilius is really a treatise in ancient astronomy, and it forms an introduction to this work. Scaliger investigates ancient systems of determining epochs, calendars, and computations of time. Applying the work of Nicholas Copernicus and other modern scientists, he reveals the principle behind these systems. In the remaining 24 years of his life, he expanded his work De Emendatione. He succeeded in reconstructing the lost chronicles of Subius, one of the most valuable ancient documents, especially valuable for ancient chronology. This he printed in 1606 in his Thesaurus Temporum, in which he collected, restored, and arranged every chronological relic extant in Greek or Latin. Scaliger versus the Jesuits. But his enemies were not merely those whose errors he had exposed and whose hostility he had excited by the violence in his language. The results of his methods of historical criticism threatened the Catholic controversialists, the authenticity of many of the documents on which they relied. The Jesuits, who aspired to be the source of all scholarship and criticism, saw the writings and authority of Scaliger as a formidable barrier to their claims. Miret, in the latter part of his life, professed the strictest orthodoxy. Lipsius, what a name. Lipsius. Enemies, therefore, aimed, if not answered, his criticisms or to disprove his statements, yet to attack him as a man and to destroy his reputation. I'm sure he had some bones in his claw. It was no easy task, for his moral character was strong. Veronese descent. After several attacks purportedly by the Jesuits, in 1607, a new attempt was made. In 1594, Scaliger had published his Epistiola de Vetuste et Splendor Scelor Gentis Scaligere et J.C. Scaligeri Vita. Say that 10 times. In 1601, Gaspar Scipius, then in the service of the Jesuits, published his Scaligere Hypoboleemus, the supposititious Scaliger, a quarto volume of more than 400 pages. The author purports to point out 500 lies. What's
up with that hypo?
Of Scaliger.
hypo,
The main argument of the
hyperbole.
book is to show the falsity of his pretensions
You know.
to be of the family of La Scala
Hyperborea.
and the narrative of his father's early life. No stronger proof, says Pattison, can be given of the impressions produced by this powerful philippic, dedicated to the defamation of an individual, than it had been the source from which the biography of Scaliger, as it now stands,
Well, it's
in our
probably where hype
biographical
comes from, right?
collections, has mainly flowed. To Scaliger,
Talking
the
about
publication of Scaligere Hypoboleemus was crushing. Whatever his father Julius had believed, Joseph had never doubted himself to be a prince of Verona, and his epistola had put forth all that he had heard from his father. He wrote a reply to Scipius entitled Confutatio Fabulae Burdenum. In the opinion of Pattison, as a refutation of Scipius, it is most complete, but there are certainly grounds for dissenting from this judgment. Scaliger purported that Scipius committed more blunders than he corrected, succeed in adducing any proof either of his father's descent from the La Scala family or of any of the events narrated by Julius prior to his arrival at Agen. Nor does Scaliger attempt a refutation of the crucial point, namely, that William, the last prince of Verona, had no son Nicholas, who could have been the alleged grandfather of Julius. Whether complete or not, the Confutio had little success. The attack attributed to the Jesuits was successful. Scipius was wont to boast that his book had killed Scaliger. The Confutatio was Scaliger's last work. 5 months after it appeared on 21st January, 1609 at 4 in the morning, he died at Leyden in the arms of his son Heinsius. In his will, Scaliger bequeathed his renowned collection of manuscripts and books to Leiden University Library. Joseph Scaliger.
We shall never know just how many historical documents are in fact counterfeit. History in general goes hand in hand with a history of forgeries. Countless chronicles as well as works of art and literature have been considered authentic for centuries before becoming denounced as counterfeit. A presumed fragment of Cicero's De Consolatione discovered by the famous humanist scholar Sigonius only became identified as a work of the latter 2 centuries after the death of the author. We would probably still believe in Cicero's authorship of said fragment if it hadn't been for the discovery of Sigonius' written confession. Similar examples are rather abundant. The thespian poet Lucius Verus, who turned out to be a 18th century Dutch scientist by the name of Herkens, plagiarizing from the 16th century Venetian author Carario. Classical texts sold to the Leipzig library by a certain Schenes in the 1920s and so forth. Think of just how many remain undiscovered. After all, the larger part of the iceberg always remains underwater. However, there may be an equal amount of valid historical documents in existence that were declared forgeries due to their being at odds with the official history. Anatoly Fomenko, the prominent mathematician, was the first to apply natural scientific methods to historical data, coming up with a revolutionary theory which implies a radical revision of history as we know it. This theory finally explains such historical oddities as the existence of Christian tabernacles in the pagan town of Pompeii and the Ottoman Turks referred to as Persians in medieval documents. It is rendered in Fomenko's fundamental work entitled History, Fiction or Science, which is finally out in English. According to the official version of history, Russia remained under the political and military yoke of the Mongols for many centuries on end. The term Mongol is usually assumed to have always meant the same thing, however. This turns out to be incorrect. The modern interpretation is of a relatively recent origin. Bear in mind that Mongolia didn't exist as an independent state until the early 20th century. The word Mongol simply meant Great One. Popular fiction dealing with conspiracies of one sort or another is actually quite tame as compared to reality. Dan Brown pens a possible conspiracy of the church against the memory of its originator Jesus. He follows unknowingly in the steps of Martin Luther, who started his Protestant revolution with accusation of papal conspiracy in the matter of Constantine's testament. Well, Martin Luther was right and Constantine's testament was false. Remember, poor Martin Luther had as media outlet nothing better than the doors of the Wittenberg's cathedral. Dan Brown has mass media at his disposal. The Roman Catholic Church, for instance, is involved in a much greater hoax than the most daring writer could possibly conceive of, one that deals with the very foundations of history itself. The above statement is neither an exaggeration, nor a metaphor. Very few people are aware that the BC AD chronology as we know it was created by a handful of Jesuits in the 16th-17th century, Joseph Scaliger, Dionysius Petavius and their successors. We have grown so accustomed to a timeline that runs through many millennia, from the Egyptian pyramids to the present day, that the mere thought of questioning its veracity seems perfectly preposterous, just like the notion of a rotating Earth must have seemed in the epoch of Galileo Galilei, and just as heretical. But nevertheless, the entire conception of ancient and medieval history known to us today owes its existence to a 16th century Jesuit hoax. A hoax that has finally been exposed with the aid of astronomy, mathematical statistics and modern computational facilities by one of the world's leading mathematicians, the Russian academician Professor Anatoly Fomenko. His fundamental work on chronology, history, fiction or science, now available in English, is more fascinating than Dan Brown at his wildest. Yet it is truly a non-fiction work. That goes to say, everything else you have read about history should probably classify as fiction.
The Reformation, specifically referred to as the Protestant Reformation, was a schism in Western Christianity, initiated by Martin Luther and continued by John Calvin, other early Protestant reformers in 16th century Europe. It is usually considered to have started with the publication of the 95 Theses by Martin Luther in 1517 and lasted till the end of the 30 Years' War with the Peace of Westphalia, 1648. Although there had been significant attempts to reform the Catholic Church before Luther, such as Jan Hus, Peter Waldo, and John Wycliffe, Luther is widely acknowledged to have started the Reformation with the 95 Theses. Luther began by criticizing the sale of indulgences, insisting that the Pope had no authority over purgatory and that the Catholic doctrine of the merits of the saints had no foundation in the Bible. The Protestant Reformation, however, would come to incorporate doctrinal changes such as complete reliance on Scripture as the only source of proper belief, sola scriptura, the belief that faith in Jesus and not good works is the only way to obtain God's pardon for sin, sola fide. The core motivation behind these changes was theological, though many other factors played a part, including the rise of nationalism, the Western schism that eroded loyalty to the papacy, the perceived corruption of the Roman Curia, the impact of humanism, the new learning of the Renaissance that questioned much traditional thought. The initial movement within Germany diversified, and other reform impulses arose independently of Luther. The spread of Gutenberg's printing press provided the means for the rapid dissemination of religious materials in the vernacular. The largest groups were the Lutherans and Calvinists. Lutheran churches were founded mostly in Germany, the Baltics, and Scandinavia, while the Reformed ones were founded in Switzerland, Hungary, France, the Netherlands, and Scotland. Yeah, but who funded them? Not founded them. The movement influenced the Church of England decisively after 1547 under Edward VI and Elizabeth I, although the Church of England had been made independent under Henry VIII in the 1530s. There were also Reformation movements throughout continental Europe known as the Radical Reformation, which gave rise to the Anabaptists, Moravian, and other pietistic movements. Radical reformers, besides forming communities outside the state sanction, often implied more extreme doctrinal change, such as the rejection of the tenets of the late antique councils of Nicaea and Chalcedon. The Catholic Church responded with a counter-reformation initiated by the Council of Trent. Much work in battling Protestantism was done by the well-organized New Order of the Jesuits, of course, in general Northern Europe, with the exception of most of Ireland, Poland, and Lithuania, came under the influence of Protestantism. Southern Europe remained Catholic, while Central Europe was the site of a fierce conflict, culminating in the 30 Years' War, which left it devastated. The 30 Years' War was a war fought primarily in Central Europe between 1618 and 1648, one of the longest and most destructive conflicts in human history, as well as the deadliest European religious war in history. It resulted in 8 million fatalities. Initially a war between various Protestant and Catholic states in the fragmented Holy Roman Empire, it gradually developed into a more general conflict involving most of the great powers. These states employed relatively large mercenary armies, and the war became less about religion and more about continuation of the France-Habsburg rivalry for European political preeminence. The war was preceded by the election of the new Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand II, who tried to impose religious uniformity on its domains, forcing Roman Catholicism on its peoples. The northern Protestant states, angered by the violation of their rights to choose that had been granted in the Peace of Augsburg, banded together to form the Protestant Union. Ferdinand II was a devout Roman Catholic. He was relatively intolerant when compared to his predecessor Rudolf II, who ruled from the largely Protestant city of Prague. Ferdinand's policies were considered strongly pro-Catholic. These events caused widespread fears throughout northern and central Europe. It triggered the Protestant Bohemians living in the then relatively loose dominion of Habsburg Austria to revolt against their nominal ruler Ferdinand II. After the so-called Prague Defenestration deposed the emperor's representatives in Prague, the Protestant states and the Catholic Habsburgs started gathering allies for war. Protestant Bohemians ousted the Habsburgs and elected a Calvinist, Frederick V. Elector of Rhenish Palatinate, as the new king of the Kingdom of Bohemia. Frederick took the offer without the support of the Protestant Union. The southern states, mainly Roman Catholic, were angered by this. Led by Bavaria, these states formed the Catholic League to expel Frederick in support of the emperor. The empire soon crushed this perceived rebellion in the Battle of White Mountain, executing leading Czech aristocrats shortly after. The Protestant world condemned the emperor's action. After the atrocities committed in Bohemia, Saxony finally gave its support to the Union and decided to fight back. Sweden, at the time a rising military power, soon intervened in 1630 under its king Gustavus Adolphus, transforming what had been the Dutch rebels in the Netherlands and the Dutch Republic. Intervened under the pretext of helping its dynastic Habsburg ally, Austria. No longer able to tolerate the encirclement of two major Habsburg powers on its borders, Catholic France entered the coalition on the side of the Protestants in order to counter the Habsburgs. The 30 Years' War devastated entire regions with famine and disease, resulting in high mortality in the populations of the German and Italian states. The Crown of Bohemia and the southern Netherlands, both mercenary and soldiers in fighting armies, traditionally looted or extorted tribute to get operating funds, which imposed severe hardships on the inhabitants of the occupied territories. The Dutch Republic enjoyed contrasting fortune. It ended its revolt against Spain in 1648, subsequently enjoyed a time of great prosperity and development, known as the Dutch Golden Age, during which it became one of the world's foremost economic naval powers. The 30 Years' War ended with the treaties of Osnabrück in Munster, part of a wider piece of Westphalia. The war altered the previous political order of European powers, the rise of Bourbon France, the curtailing of Habsburg ambition, and the ascendancy of Sweden as a great power created a new balance of power in the continent, with France emerging from the war strengthened and increasingly dominant in the latter part of the 17th century. As listed here, Spain was interested in the German states because it held territories of Spanish Netherlands in the western part of the empire and states within Italy that were connected by land through the Spanish Road. The Dutch revolt against Spanish domination during the 1560s, leading to a protracted war of independence that led to a truce only in 1609. France was nearly surrounded by territory controlled by two Habsburg states, Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, and feeling threatened, was eager to exert its power against the weaker German states. This dynastic concern overtook religious ones and led to a Catholic France's participation on the otherwise Protestant side of the war. Sweden and Denmark-Norway were interested in gaining control over the northern German states bordering the Baltic Sea. One can really see the origins of America right there in all of that. These people back then were born with a foot on their throat. They were subjects. They weren't human beings. Anyone who thinks we haven't come a long way really needs to study the Middle Ages to see how good we have it today. We have to definitely make sure that something like this never happens again. We can't let political correctness run amok and threaten our freedoms. They'll see how far they can take it.
The Inquisitions. The word Inquisition refers to harsh or unfair investigations or a series of questions. The Roman Catholic Inquisitions consisted of organizations within the Catholic Church acting on behalf of the Catholic Church, finding, interrogating, and punishing people who disagreed with Roman Catholic theology. We will be discussing two stage or period is known as the Spanish Inquisition, and it began in the beginning of the 15th century. It was launched against Protestants, Jews, Muslims, and others. Medieval Inquisition. The lead-up to the 13th century Inquisition involves the massacre of a group of dissident believers known as the Cathars or Albigenses, who rose up in France in the 11th century. Although there is room for debate as to if the Cathars held to truly heretical teachings, it is a fact that they believed the Roman Catholic Church's sacramental system was evil, and that the Catholic Church was not teaching God's message, which was expressed in the Holy Bible. These people had a very high view of Scripture. They believed that when secular authorities punished heretics, that this was sin. The name Cathar means pure. They sought to live lives of holiness. A 13th century Dominican named Brenarius estimated that by his day, there were over 4 million Cathars in over 1,000 cities. Rome perceived this movement as a serious threat which was to be eliminated. In 1179, the Third Lateran Council condemned and anathematized this group, and in 1208, Pope Innocent III decided to launch a vicious crusade against them. This crusade lasted from 1209 to 1229. In a general letter to the faithful, Pope Innocent III angrily wrote, quote, "O most mighty soldiers of Christ, most brave warriors, ye oppose the agents of Antichrist, and ye fight against the servants of the old serpent. Fight for God." This war on the Cathars, though ultimately unsuccessful in and of itself in getting rid of all of them, was nevertheless extremely bloody and ruthless. In one incident, the so-called Battle of Bezij resulted in the slaughter of 10,000 to 20,000 believers. Commenting on this incident, Philip Schaff notes, "Neither age nor sex was spared. Church walls interposed no protection, and 7,000 were put to death in St. Magdalen's Church alone." Pope Innocent III offered his crusade soldiers spiritual reward for the murder of these believers, that is, indulgences for the remission of temporal punishments for sin. This crusade involved many massacres as well as the burning of Cathars who were captured. The clerics within the Cathar movement were ruthlessly eliminated without the benefit of a hearing. In regards to the stronghold of Minerve, 140 Cathar clerics were burnt alive, and the prisoners had their ears, noses, and lips cut off. Commenting on the severity of this crusade, historian Williston Walker notes that Innocent III's efforts, quote, led to 20 years of destructive warfare, in which the power of the southern nobility was shattered, and cities and provinces devastated. Another group which was to be eliminated was known as the Waldensians. This movement began in 1177 in Italy and was based on the teachings of Peter Waldo, AD 1140 to 1218. The Waldensian believers affirmed that the Bible was the ultimate authority, and that whatever was not found in Holy Scripture was not to be believed by Christians. These believers practiced memorizing the Bible, and its preachers went out 2 by 2 preaching. They, among other things, rejected masses and prayers for the dead as unscriptural, and denied Rome's doctrine of purgatory. They also refused to venerate saints. Because of these teachings, the Roman Catholic Church enacted what is known as the Episcopal Inquisition, whereby local Catholic bishops would turn unrepentant Bible believers like the Waldensians and others, who refused Rome's teachings, over to civil authorities for punishment. This Episcopal Inquisition was ordered by Pope Lucius III, who reigned from AD 1181 to 1185. On November 4th, 1184, he, in unison with the Council of Verona, issued the bull Ad Abolendum, that is, on abolition, where he condemned and excommunicated the Waldensians and other sects. The bull says, quote, to abolish the malignity of diverse heresies which are lately sprung up in most parts of the world, it is but fitting that the power committed to the Church should be awakened, that by the concurring assistance of the imperial strength, both the insolence and malpertness of the heretics in their false designs may be crushed. We likewise declare all entertainers and defenders of the said heretics be liable to the same sentence, unless by adjuring his heresy and making satisfaction, he immediately returns to the orthodox faith. We decree him to be left to the sentence of the secular judge, to receive condign, that is deserved punishment, according to the quality of the offense. In the same bull, Pope Lucius III also decreed that the goods and money of the punished heretics be confiscated for the use of the Roman Church. This led to what is known as the First Formal Inquisition in the medieval era. In 1229, the Council of Toulouse issued a decree sanctioning burning at the stake for the punishment of heresy. Likewise, the German Mirror of Saxon laws were compiled in 1235 and ordered the execution of heretics and unbelievers by burning at the stake. With Cathars still around due to the failure of Innocent III's crusade against them, as well as Waldensians and other dissidents walking the lands, Pope Gregory IX, who reigned from AD 1227 to 1247, cemented the Inquisition. He took interrogation, trial, and the punishment of heretics out of the hands of the bishops and placed them into the hands of the monastic orders such as the Franciscans and Dominicans. Everything was now in order for possibly the worst atrocity in all of history to be carried out. By 1244, the Cathars were basically wiped out. Their last refuge was Montségur, France. However, they were overcome by the Inquisition, and the 200 remaining Catholic clerics were there burnt alive. As historian Williston Walker remarks, by means of Inquisition, the Cathars were utterly rooted out by the middle of the 14th century. As time progressed, the Inquisition became crueler and crueler. The final step in configuring the procedure of the Inquisition was made by Pope Innocent IV, when he, in the bull Ad Extirpanda of 1252, authorized the use of brutal torture as a means of extracting a confession from alleged heretics and Bible believers. This practice was also confirmed by later popes such as Alexander IV in 1259 and Pope Clement IV in 1265. Again, during this period, the inquisitors responsible for hearings, confiscation of property, overseeing torture, and burning at the stake were mainly priests within the monastic Dominican and Franciscan orders. In regards to citizens turning in other citizens for interrogation, the Council of Toulouse, in its 18th canon, made it clear that mere suspicion or public rumor of heresy was sufficient for formal Inquisition proceedings to be leveled. This resulted in people falsely being accused of heresy by Catholic citizens they had rivalries with. Others turned in members of their own community in order to appear loyal to Rome and avoid Inquisition themselves. There were even fixed rewards given to spies who specialized in ratting out suspected heretics and Bible believers. In 1239 at Mount Amy, he had 27 burnt to death, or as another account reports, 180. Michael C. Thomson mentions one of the most sadistic and maniacal inquisitors of the 13th century, namely Conrad of Marburg. He investigated heresy in Languedoc and Rhineland. Many placed into his hands were given the choice of speedy confession or death by burning. The Archbishop of Mayence wrote to Pope Gregory IX about this cruel method, and the Pope's response was to identify Conrad as a champion of the Christian faith and to encourage him to continue punishing heretics as well as alleged witches. Conrad was known for stripping naked those he tortured in order to first humiliate them. Now, the previously mentioned Waldensian Bible believers, though hunted vigorously and massacred by Rome during the Inquisition, nevertheless miraculously survived it, unlike the Cathars. Schaff notes that in 1308, Dominican and Franciscan inquisitors hunted and murdered the Waldensians in Bohemia and Poland. However, after facing the Inquisition and enduring the horrors it produced, the Waldensians eventually escaped into the mountain regions of northern Italy in order to avoid total annihilation. They survived over the centuries, and many of them eventually joined the Protestant Reformation movement in the 16th century. It's interesting to note that many of Rome's quote-unquote saints came out of these Dominican and Franciscan orders, which were involved with the Inquisition. For example, St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Albert the Great were Dominicans, and St. Bonaventure was a Franciscan. It's sickening how Rome would canonize and exalt men who were involved in orders which oversaw the torture and death of massive amounts of Bible believers and others. The medieval Inquisition did not stop there. In AD 1484, Pope Innocent VIII produced the bull Summis Desiderantis Affectibus, wherein he authorized inquisitors to find, try, and murder alleged witches. In this so-called Great Witch Hunt, intellectual arguments meant to persuade the person of their error were not utilized by inquisitors. Instead, the goal was to extract a confession by torture and then murder those rumored to be alleged witches. It was believed by the Catholics that a witch could not cry from pain, and since those tortured cried, the papal inquisitors claimed the devils must have made them cry as a trick to convince everyone they were not a witch. The inquisitors would often shave the bodies of alleged witches, including the private parts, since Catholic superstition at that time said that witches would 1. Hide objects of witchcraft in their hair or private parts, and 2. That witches had a birthmark or scar which would function as a teat to feed milk or blood to imps or the devil himself. Inquisitors would therefore stab alleged witches on their scars or birthmarks with needles, since they claimed a witch would not bleed if their witch's teat was pierced. However, when the people did bleed, the torturers claimed Satan allowed the bleeding to make it appear the person was not a witch. They then resorted to torture such as putting hot boiling fat in the person's eyes, underarms, and thighs, which many times led to infection or death. In Germany, alleged witches who were tortured into confession then had hot irons put on their breasts and arms, their right hand cut off, their body burnt at the stake, and their ashes thrown into the river. Most of these accused witches were simply social outcasts the community did not like, the Spanish Inquisition. Just when one thinks it could not possibly get any worse, they encounter the second phase of Inquisition known as the Spanish Inquisition. In the 1480s, many conversos fled to Portugal to escape Inquisition. However, in 1536, the Inquisition found its way even there. In his work, The Grand Inquisitor's Manual, Jonathan Kirsch relays that, quote, Protestants joined the Jewish and Muslim conversos as principal targets of the Spanish Inquisition. In 1533, a priest who was charged with the seduction of a nun sought to appease the inquisitors by offering them the names of 70 men and women whom he denounced as Lutheran heretics. The first Protestant burned for heresy by the Spanish Inquisition went to the stake in 1540, and 26 of the 30 accused heretics at the Auto at Toledo in 1559 were Protestants. The procedures of Inquisition at this time were as follows, as developed by the Inquisitors General Thomas de Torquemada. First, there was accusation. Any civilian could level an accusation of heresy or immorality against another, and it would result in a tribunal. Even if no citizen accused anyone, inquisitors could freely accuse citizens. Abuses crept in since the wealthy were often targeted by inquisitors since their wealth would be confiscated and go towards funding inquisition. Second, there was detention. Once accused, the person was detained and their property was seized temporarily, depending on the outcome of the tribunal. Detention often lasted months. Families of the detained were not informed, which often resulted in women and children of the family not being able to survive without the man of the house around. Thirdly, after detention came interrogation. The goal was to gain a confession and pass a sentence. There was no intention of convincing the accused of the error of their alleged heresy or immorality. There were many methods of torture used to gain a confession, including the following. There was the garrucha or strappado, which was a suspension system which had ropes, weights, and pulleys. The victims' arms were tied behind their back. They were hoisted in the air, and then they were dropped. They were stopped in midair right before hitting the ground, so that the weights tied to their ankles caused great pain and dislocation. There was also the taka, which was basically waterboarding, where a cloth was put over the victim's mouth and water poured in, resulting in the victim feeling like they were drowning. Also utilized was the potro, or rack. The victim was placed on this device, and their arms and legs were severely stretched, causing excruciating tearing of the muscles and dislocation. In 1591, Pablo Garcia, the secretary of the Suprema in Madrid, wrote instructions on how this torture was to be carried out. He stated, quote,
according to new chronology, the traditional chronology consists of 4 overlapping copies of the true chronology, shifted back in time by significant intervals with some further revisions. Fomenko claims all events and characters conventionally dated earlier than the 11th century are fictional and represent phantom reflections of actual Middle Ages events and characters brought about by intentional or accidental misdatings of historical documents. According to Fomenko, this led early chronologists to believe, or choose to believe, that those accounts allegedly happened thousands of years before. The originals, regrettably, and were conveniently lost. For example, the oldest extant manuscripts of monumental treatises on ancient Roman and Greek history, such as Annius and Histories, are conventionally dated AD 1100, more than a full millennium after the events they describe. They did not come to scholars' attention until the 15th century. According to Fomenko, the 15th century is probably when these documents were first written. Central to Fomenko's new chronology is his claim of the existence of a vast Slav Turk empire, which he called the Russian Horde, which he says played a dominant role in Eurasian history before the 17th century. Various peoples identified in ancient and medieval history, from the Scythians, Huns, Goths, Bulgars, through the Polyan Dalubi, Drevlian Pechenegs, to, in more recent times, the Cossacks, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, are nothing but elements of the single Russian horde. For the new chronologists, peoples such as Ukrainians, Belarusians, Mongols, and others who assert their national independence from Russia are suffering from historical delusion. Fomenko claims that the most probable prototype of the historical Jesus was Andronicus I Komnenos, allegedly AD 1152 to 1185. The emperor of Byzantium, known for his failed reforms, his traits and deeds, reflected in biographies of many real and imaginary persons. The historical Jesus is a composite figure and reflection of the Old Testament prophet Elijah, 850 to 800 BC, ? Pope Gregory VII, 1020, ? 1085. Saint Basil, Caesarea, 330 to 379, and even Li Yuanhao, also known as Emperor Jingzong, or Son of Heaven, Emperor of Western Qi, who reigned in 1032 to 1048. Euclides, Bacchus, and Dionysius Flamenco explains the seemingly vast differences in the biographies of these figures as resulting from differences in languages, points to view and time frame of the authors of said accounts and biographies. He claims that the historical Jesus may have been born in 1152 and was crucified around 1185 on Joshua's Hill overlooking the Bosphorus. Flamenco also merges the cities and histories of Jerusalem, Rome, and Troy into New Rome, which equals Gospel Jerusalem in the 12th and 13th centuries, which equals Troy, which equals Yoros Castle. To the south of Yoros Castle is Joshua's Hill, which Flamenco alleges is the hill cavalry depicted in the Bible. Flamenco claims the Hagia Sophia is actually the biblical Temple of Solomon. He identifies Solomon as the Sultan of the Sultan of Suleiman the Magnificent, 1494 to 1566. On the other hand, according to Flamenco, the word Rome, in parentheses, is a placeholder and can signify any one of several different cities and kingdoms. He claims the first Rome, or ancient Rome, or Mizraim,
is an ancient Egyptian kingdom in the delta of the Nile, with its capital in Alexandria.
The second and most famous New Rome is Constantinople. The third Rome is constituted by three different cities: Constantinople again, Rome in Italy, and Moscow. According to his claims, Rome in Italy was founded around AD 1380 by Aeneas, and Moscow can refer to different cities at different times. And the word Israel did not define a state, even not a territory, but people fighting for God. For example, French St. Louis and English Elizabeth called themselves the King and Queen of Israel.
He claims the parallelism between John the Baptist, Jesus, the Old Testament prophets, implies that the New Testament was written before the Old. Flamenco claims that the Bible was being written until the Council of Trent, 1543 to 1565, when the list of canonical books was established, and all apocryphal books were ordered to be destroyed. Flamenco also claims that Plato and Plotinus are one and the same person. According to him, some texts by or about Pletho are misdated and believed to be texts by or about Plotinus or Plato. He claims similar duplicates for Dionysius the Areopagite and Dionysius Petavius. He claims Florence and the House of Medici bankrolled an important role in the magnificent Roman and Greek past. Flamenco and his colleagues make numerous claims. Historians and translators often assign different dates for the same accounts in historical events, creating multiple phantom copies, and that these events are often misdated by centuries or even millennia and end up incorporated in conventional chronology. And this chronology was incorporated by Joseph Justus Scaliger in the Evsili Pampili and the Thesaurus Temporum, 1583 and 1606. In his chronology, the events of the New Testaments, Flamenco believes there is no reliable written record of human events before the 11th century, because most of our knowledge of earlier cultures is based on texts or copies of texts that date from after that era. From that point on, chroniclers, primarily learned religious scholars, use supposition, arbitrary consensus, to fix the dates of key events in history. In doing so, they grafted recent occurrences onto earlier dates, sometimes unwittingly, sometimes perniciously, thus creating numerous historical duplicates. History appears to repeat itself. Flamenco suggests because it is thoroughly plagiarized. In this chronology, the events of the New Testament precede those of the Old Testament, and in any case, most of the stories are concocted to reflect later incidents. Joan of Arc was a model for the biblical kid. Does this sound uncanny? Well, a little bit, but you know what? I think it hasn't been anywhere near as long as they say it is since our last cataclysm. I mean, for all we know, it could have been 200 or 300 years ago. We really don't know. We only know what we have, and what he's saying is nothing exists before 1100 AD. So, I mean, it's anybody's guess what could have happened up till then. Crazy. He's a tad nationalistic, though. So, I don't know what's driving his motivation. This version of events is sustainable by hard facts and logic, validated by new astronomical research and statistical analysis of ancient sources, but it's a corrupted cosmology. To a greater extent than everything you may have read and heard about history before. See, this is another example of someone who's a maverick in their field, but taking it for granted that mainstream cosmology is correct. That's why they call it the queen of the sciences. And in short, he argues that Bolderadian copies without an original. We are in a matrix with medieval rules. These rules are explained in a 7-volume corpus by Fomenko, of course. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. The late Russian social critic, Alexander Zinoviev, provided the foreword to this masterwork. The entire history of humanity up until the 17th century is a forgery of global proportions, he wrote, a falsification as deliberate as it is universal. It sounds insane, and it is derided by most modern scholars as pseudo-history. Orwell's old cliche about control of the past may come as a shock to young first-time readers of 1984, but to chronologists, it's old hat. Historical chronology, wrote the German historian Dietrich Hermann Hegzwitsch in 1854, is necessary to furnish a principle of order and to promote the orderly arrangements of social life. When you get older, you come full circle and you realize that all that don't mean shit. It's better to be home, which is sweet sanctuary. The murkiness of humanity's timeline is an age-old problem. Absent a solution, society itself cannot function. Entire religious schisms turn on how church fathers set the dates for certain biblical events. This stuff is important. Indeed it is. Mainstream cosmology is corrupt. Have a champagne taste and a Kool-Aid pocketbook.
One might wonder why we should want to revise the chronology of ancient history today and base our revision on new empirical statistical methods. It would be worthwhile to remind the reader that in the 16th and 17th century, the chronology
was considered to be a subdivision of mathematics, archaeological dating, dendrochronological dating, paleographical dating, numismatic dating, carbon dating, and other methods. Dating of ancient sources and artifacts known today are erroneous, non-exact, or dependent on modern chronology.
No single document in existence can be reliably dated earlier than the 11th century. Most ancient artifacts you may find other than consensual explanation. Histories of ancient Rome, Greece, and Egypt were crafted during the Renaissance by humanists and clergy, mostly on the basis of documents of their own making. The Old Testament represents a rendition of events of the 14th to 16th centuries AD in Europe and Byzantium, containing prophecies about future events related in the New Testament, a rendition of events of AD 1152 and 1185. The history of religions runs as follows. The pre-Christian period, before the 11th century, the birth of Jesus. Bacchic Christianity, 11th and 12th centuries, before and after the life of Jesus. Christianity, 12th to 16th centuries, and its subsequent mutations into Orthodox Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism, and Islam. The Alchemist of Claudius Ptolemy, traditionally dated to be around AD 150 and considered the cornerstone of classical astronomy, was compiled in the 16th and 17th centuries from astronomical data of the 9th to 16th centuries.
37 complete Egyptian horoscopes found in Dendera, Esna, and other temples have unique, valid astronomical solutions, with dates ranging from AD 1000 up to as late as AD 1700. The vocabulary of Egyptian astronomical symbols, once applied to horoscopes from temples, allows for extraction of unique dates of eclipses. Astronomical data therein contained is sufficient for unique dating. There are symbols allowing for astronomical interpretations, and the symbols do not change from one temple horoscope to another. The horoscopes from temples sufficient contain data about eclipses visible, eclipses visible in Egypt, allowing their exact pinpointing of the time axis. The Book of Revelation, as we know it, contains a horoscope dated to 25th September, 10th of October, 1486, compiled by Kabbalist
Johannes Rauchland.
Bizarre phraseology which NASA has never satisfactorily explained. One of the most obvious and most heard euphemisms, of course, is the eagle has landed, and everyone associated that with the eagle symbol of America. But in fact, the eagle is a Masonic symbol, because it is really, what is being referred to is really the double eagle of Freemasonry and not the bald eagle of America. The double eagle is a very famous symbol of Freemasonry. It was originally the emblem of the Habsburg dynasty of Europe, a very powerful set of oligarchs and royalty that still exists.
It's been around a lot longer than that.
Wars and
that goes back to old Earth.
Now, in the Quran, chapter 9:11, no less, it says, "For it is written that a son of Arabia would awaken a fearsome eagle. The wrath of the eagle will be felt throughout the lands of Allah."
Ages and Chaos.
Emanuel Velikovsky. Velikovsky claimed in his book that the historians of ancient Egypt and ancient Israel are 5 centuries out of step. He began by claiming that the Exodus took place not, as Orthodoxy has it, at some point during the New Kingdom, but at the fall of the Middle Kingdom. He identifies the Hyksos with the biblical Amalekites, the biblical Queen of Sheba with the Egyptian Queen Hatshepsut, the biblical Shishak, king of Egypt, with Pharaoh Tutmosis III, and claims that the Egyptian Amarna letters from the late 18th dynasty describe events from the kingdom of Israel and Judah, roughly the time of King Ahab. Some specific proposals included: there's synchronizing the Ipuwer papyrus from the beginning of Egypt's second intermediate period with the biblical Exodus. The Ipuwer papyrus was conventionally dated to approximately 350 years before the conventional date of the Exodus, 1450 BCE.
There are those that say Akhenaten was Moses. The words Moses and Moses are awful close, and I think that might have been more of a title. I don't know, but if Akhenaten was Moses, it would make perfect sense.
The concept of alter egos, historical figures who were known by different names in 2 different sources, Egyptian and Greek, and were conventionally considered to be entirely different people living in different centuries, but were proposed by Velikovsky to be actually erroneously dated accounts of the same individuals and events. Hatshepsut equals the Queen of Sheba. Solomon's kingdom equals the land of Punt. Tutmosis III equals King Shishak, who sacked Jerusalem, separating Horemheb and the 19th dynasty pharaohs from the earlier 18th dynasty pharaohs instead of the 22nd through 25th dynasties, followed upon the earlier part of the 18th.
leading down to the Assyrian invasions of the early 7th century BCE. So Velikovsky was saying this in 1945. Be wary of mathematicians, especially when they tell the truth. St. Augustine. He who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Orwell. According to sources, the imperial cult were the bigwigs, or movers and shakers of the day. They had ceremonies. They had many centers that later transformed into the Christian cult. After the change of dynasties, they felt the need to create their own mythology. They did it through the writing of the Gospels, and they deified Titus, the Roman emperor. The theological structure in the Gospels is the same one that was presented to the Roman Senate. Titus was declared the Son of God. The Arch of Titus, that still stands today, is inscribed to the divine Titus, Son of God. They spread their propaganda using the media of the day, the roads of Rome. The richest family in the world at the time, the Alexanders, funded this campaign. Who were the Alexanders? They were a Jewish family that served as tax collectors in Egypt. One of the members of the Alexander family was Philo of Alexandria, who was writing and combining Jewish beliefs as well as Roman and Greek pagan beliefs of the day. The symbols
I think they were running the show
into the church. For example, the title of the chief pontiff of Rome was transferred into the Roman Catholic Church. And I have to admit, it's so confusing that it would be impossible for someone to confuse the issue. You got this group saying this, you got that group
we
saying
live in a
that,
world of
group
patsies
saying that, and then you got the lunatic fringe saying whatever comes to mind. How can one sort out what
Everybody's
is what
got patsies
in this mess? History. Mostly false events, unimportant, brought about by rulers, mostly knaves, and soldiers, mostly fools. Not until lions have their historian. Tale of the hunt will always favor the hunter. Belief is the enemy of knowing. Epistemology and justice. Sacred is deathless. Once a person stands for something, he will create enemies. To be violent and arrogant, one must be ignorant of the universe.
You know, they say that Catholic religion is sun worship, but there's a whole lot of Saturn iconography in their sun worship. I think it's the first sun that they worship, their black robes. Both sides aren't without their propaganda. The truth is probably so far out, it would be hard to believe.
When they do things, they pay attention.
Americans are the most brainwashed, propagandized people on the face of the earth. Our mainstream media makes Joseph Goebbels look like a kindergartner with a crayon, and they haul out the biggest lies. Everything that NASA has found on these planets, we haven't the first clue of. We can guess, and we got some pretty good guessers, but we don't really know. But some of the things that I've seen are very tantalizing. They lead me to believe that the Earth is an outpost, and there's another human race on another planet going around another star, and they're probably thousands of years ahead of us. And those little grays that they see, those are probably androids just making sure we don't blow ourselves to kingdom come. As far as our ancient history, it's like everything else. It's just all blurred and messed up. Situation normal, all bleeped up. Or FUBAR.
when the papal forces came here to invade, they were operating under the doctrine of discovery, which stated that the number 13 was the number of the devil, and that all mathematics not endorsed by the church was officially devil worship. So according to that doctrine, unfortunately, all Native American civilization was declared satanic, and the conquerors were given the right to slaughter every Native American they knew who could count.
Always been old maps, and there's always been a history of our planet that's been hidden.
I've come to the conclusion after many, many years of research that we're not simply dealing with UFOs. That's a small thing. If that had been the whole story, our government would probably have told us this a long time ago.
And for whatever reason, there are those who have their own intent to keep mysteries from the people. And this is why I feel the earth is all out of whack and people are out of whack, because the power of what we live on and who we are and our heritage is not being spoken of.
Some intelligences, some advanced, I mean very advanced intelligences that appear to have multidimensional source, origin. Now, I can't even tell you what the hell that means. Same single story is told again and again and again. We are a created hybrid race. We are the product of some vast laboratory of some kind. And that apparently the human race is not an accident. We're not some cosmic joke. We didn't just happen. The Darwinian theory of how we evolved from the apes doesn't even begin to hold water. I no longer investigate UFOs landing. I no longer investigate abductions, contacts, landing marks, and any of that. I have files that are filled with this kind of information.
When we as human beings think, where did it all start from? I don't think there's a single human being who can scientifically prove and say this was the case. We have hypotheses and we have a right to think whatever we want. But the main thing is that we realize that we are spirits, we are energy.
This involves who we are, as a race, as a species. How did we get here? Why are we here? And where are we going?
And you go into the Southwest, those tribes down there have had 400 years or more contact with the Spanish church. They've even picked up skinwalkers, they picked up evil spirits. We don't have a devil, we don't have it. But we don't have this force because our concept of the Creator doesn't make such a thing. I've never seen a devil. I don't care if the white man believes in it. That's what the white man believes in it. That doesn't mean that I have to believe in it. I believe in what I see. Have I ever seen the Creator? I've never seen the Creator directly. I don't expect to. But I see every day what the Creator makes. I can pick up a bouquet of flowers and hold that bouquet of flowers. I know the Great Spirit is kind and is very artistic. Bees come and sniff the flowers. They make honey. Birds sing. Those are all beautiful expressions of this Creator. So the Great Spirit gave me my life. Why should I fear it? I live because of the Creator. So I don't fear the Creator. I don't fear evil spirits. And yet we have contact into the spirit world. And that is what is powerful.
All the evil deeds that have been done. None of us come out in a cookie cutter. To me, human beings are the only beings that know we're going to die on Earth. Yet they show no concern at all for what kind of legacy they leave. People are smart. They figure things out. They should know that. I guess what would be the worst thing for me would be what kind of legacy I left. I would think that these people being in the positions they were in would think the same thing. They thought nothing of life at all. That's puzzling. I was raised by a Christian mother and Christian father. I never saw anything like that. It was all, peace and love and all that. But man, what an ugly past it comes from. Once one thing opens your eyes, then everything becomes suspect. And then they start dropping like flies. In all my life, I've only seen one leader in history that cared about what kind of legacy he left. Kennedy was president. America was loved all over the world. It sure isn't like that anymore. what happened. I made this video over a year ago, so I tried to leave it in as much of its original form as I could. John Kennedy was our best leader, our best chance to change the world. And we lost him.
All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
Newton comes up with the only explanation he can think of, given the knowledge he has. As knowledge is acquired, better information is available, and more realistic explanations can be offered. If this is an electric discharge crater, we live in an electric universe. And again, the sun is not a giant nuclear reactor. It's basically a ball of electricity. It's not actually that hot, close to. About 6,000 degrees. It's not very hot. Because if it was, the closer you got to it, the hotter you'd get. And you don't. It is powerful. It's a huge thing, the sun.
Well, the corona is 2 million. That's a little better.
The whole of celestial mechanics needs to be rethought. This was one of the points that Velikovsky came up with.
And I stopped this book with the catastrophe that divides the Bronze Age from the Iron Age. If you believe in a Greek Dark Age, you know that the Bronze Age comes to an end around 1100 BCE. If you don't believe in it, as I do not, it ends around 600 BCE. And if you are a nerd for stratigraphy, it may even end later, like 400, 350 BCE. Anyway, it will end before the first millennium AD, after Christ CE, whatever you prefer to call it. And I have to say today that the major
Hello, everyone. Well, that's going to do it for tonight. One moment. Trying to keep my videos, a little bit shorter. 5-6 hours are a little long. So just gonna keep them down to 3 if I can, or maybe 4 at the most. But thanks for tuning in. We had a light night, but it was Sunday late, so I expected that. So we'll see you next week. Thanks for coming, and thanks for watching. Please share, like, subscribe, and do donate if you can help the cause. I will be back next week with a fresh set of things to talk about. If there's anything that you'd like to see or hear, just put in the comments, let me know, and I'll do my best to get it to you. Thank you so much for watching tonight. I hate to leave, but I'm tired and afraid I'm going to fall asleep. If I can't sleep, I'll come back. Thank you so much for coming. And I love all you guys. It's good to see you, Ray. And it's Polly Girl. We're going to do a call soon. I told you that. I'll let you know. Rick Jones. Thank you for coming. I have to give you the tradition.
Rick Jones.
Valerie, good. Oh, it's good to see Valerie. I'm sorry that I didn't get to talk to you. Grouch. Well, that's good to see you in the comments, Grouch. And Jess, good to see you, Jess. And Frank, with your new name here, it is
AL4LVE79.
Yes. And looks like you guys had some cool talks. Hexafus, Harry Wall. Thank you for coming, everybody. I'm going to end it with a little song, and then we're going to go home. Or I'm going to go to bed. All right, I'll see you later. Doing okay? I hope you are too. I'll see you next week. Finish it off with a little song. If I can find it. If I play this video, they'll put an adult tag on it. So I'm going to save this for another time. I wanted to show the most viewed video I have, which is part 3 of the men who killed Kennedy. Only because there was another assassination attempt on Trump today. When will they stop? It was thwarted. He's fine, but it's just going to keep happening. It's just, that's the way. By calling him Hitler and all that stuff, that's just wrong. I mean, if they don't have an argument to use against him, they call him names. I mean, that's something like a 6th grader would do. We got the whole damn Democratic Party. I mean, I don't know what happened to my Democratic Party, but they're sure not the same as they were when John Kennedy was president. And by Bobby Kennedy joining forces with Trump, I can understand. They probably had a conversation that went something like this. You know, they have a lot in common with their policies. Trump will say, come and help me, Bobby. Help me run the government and take over like the FDA to make sure we're not being poisoned. And in 2028, I'll support you. It would be kind of cool. But anyways, good night. And I'll just play this little tune for you and we'll go leave.
Stating the respects. There is always in the drought of the old machine. Kindness takes a bit of the sting away. I'm very grateful for that. Asking only for as much as you can do. I just hate talking about it. Secrets of the universe. Secrets of the universe. manuscript, Atlantis, Hyperborea, airships of the 1890s. Medieval ancient coins and giants of Peru, cities on the moon, Antarctica. Skulls of Peru, Temple of the Doom. Now what is it? Knowledge. Dr. C said he is unacknowledged. Secret from the scholars. Electric solar system, electric stars, cold plasma, Dealey Plaza, secret from the scholars,